Generally not known that an alternative electric sun model was proposed in 1979 by the engineer Ralph Jurgens. It explains simply the critical longevity of all electrical lights. It is plugged into a galactic circuit, and galactic circuits are the basis of plasma cosmology, which is ignored by astrophysics, but was developed by experimental plasma scientists and engineers in the 20th century. I would say plasma physics is next-gen physics. Quite unlike mathematical Big Bang cosmology, plasma cosmology is simply explanative and has proven to be predictive. Only in the last few years have the circumstances arisen to enable the more recent electric sun model to be tested, called the Safire project. Cutting-edge engineering from Artis International Incorporated was contracted by the International Science Foundation to experimentally test the electric sun model. Artis International Incorporated is an independent body which has no affiliation. Recently, the Safire team shared an extraordinary update on their results to date, and I don't know if you saw the video, but it is extraordinary. In part one of his two-part presentation, our chief science advisor, physicist Walt Thornhill, discussed the Safire experiment, its results, and its promise for the future. And must be part two already? It is short. In part one of this presentation, physicist Walt Thornhill began his analysis of the recent remarkable update by the team behind the groundbreaking scientific experiment, the Safire project. For the first time, an independent experiment has been conducted to audit the electric sun model, first proposed by engineer Ralph Jurgens in the 1970s. Safire's principal scientist and chief engineer, Montgomery Childs, recently said of Safire's results, "In all our experiments and discoveries, we have found no disparities with the electric sun model. We believe the Safire experiment validates and supports the electric sun model." Childs is president and founder of the engineering firm Artis International Incorporated, which was contacted by the International Science Foundation to experimentally test the electric sun model. So coming into it, Montgomery Childs was a neutral third party, which is what science is all about. Explore all the avenues. As noted previously, Artis International Incorporated is an independent body which has no affiliations with the Thunderbolts project. And that is check and mate. But good luck trying to get mainstream to even pretend, because they're just too busy being obtuse. 2 + 2 is 7. NASA's dim view of stars. The Cone Nebula shows a star at the top of a conical-shaped dusty plasma festooned with lights. The image strikes an instinctive chord. The mythical celestial world mountain, around which the stars revolve. That was the one that I thought had Lucy on the top, but maybe she left. The cosmic Christmas tree with lights. Fireworks displays against a night sky. Why? Because it reflects back to us our own prehistory, when a strange drama was taking place in the sky. The Earth was enveloped in a towering polar auroral plasma, flashing with light and with bright celestial bodies at its distant focus. How do we know? Prehistoric mankind around the globe chiseled representations of what they saw into solid rock. The effort required was prodigious, the motivation extraordinary. Modern astronomy seems unable to address the issue, offering instead a comfortable myth of cosmic stability. 20th century technologies have enabled astronomers to see the stars and planets ever more clearly, but their predictions are clouded by centuries-old beliefs about celestial harmony, that the heat of the light of stars is due to some kind of internal fire. That we understand gravity sufficiently to declare that it obeys a universal law and alone governs cosmic evolution. These perceptions have become dogma, and dogma hinders progress. So it is not surprising that a growing number of critics see gravitational cosmology of the Big Bang as sterile and irrelevant to any real understanding of our place in history in the universe. The fact that it has nothing to say about life itself, the deepest mystery of the universe, is just one of countless signs that the present field of view is too limited. For the moment, I want to feature 2 reports in December 2014, I believe. Let me see, make sure. 2008. For the moment, I want to feature 2 reports in December that show astronomers do not understand stars. The view of stars as fires in the sky, was understandable when chemical fires were the only source of light that we knew, and the only question we asked of stars was, how do they shine? But that view failed. Then we realized that the stars had to burn steadily for eons. The discovery of nuclear energy offered an answer to this new question without having to reevaluate the accumulation of other assumptions about stars. In other words, it was the lazy way. The thermonuclear assumption was never proved, and observations that contradicted it were never crucial enough to compel astronomers to doubt it. It came full circle and led to a futile, decades-long effort to mimic the conjectured process to provide power on the Earth. All the while, a clue to a better answer stared the experimenters and theoreticians in the face. They were using electricity to trigger thermonuclear reactions. Maybe the sun was doing that too. Now, I just heard Eric Dollard say that an H-bomb, it shorts out the Earth's electrostatic field. So, yes, nuclear weapons are electric. Radiation comes from electricity. We use electricity as a convenient means of lighting and heating. It doesn't require the power to be generated on site. We've discovered, that thin transmission lines can carry great amounts of power over long distances. From generator to light bulb, nature is parsimonious in achieving its ends. After I tell you this, you might never look at an X-ray machine the same again. The heart of an X-ray machine is an electrode pair, a cathode and an anode that sits inside a glass vacuum. That's right, X-ray machines are electrical. They make X-rays using electricity, and even in the micro world, planets work the same way. Why wouldn't stars get power from natural transmission lines? The satisfying answer is that they do. Radio astronomers can trace the telltale magnetic fields in deep space that they have. The magnetic fields mark filamentary cosmic transmission lines, carrying electrical power between galaxies and stars. NASA's dim view of stars. The latest report from NASA is a fitting end to the year of the electric universe. It demonstrates that the electric model of stars envisioned the latest observations, while NASA researchers again mask their assumptions by stating them as facts. Ironically, the report refers to some stars as low-energy fluorescent light bulbs. As usual, all the science reporting agencies repeat NASA's words without critical comment. Mainstream media rarely do investigate science journalism. As usual, all science reporting agencies repeat NASA's words without critical comment. No doubt, just parrots. Astronomers find the two dimmest stellar bulbs. Yeah, they don't mind calling them bulbs. Well, that's just admitting that the universe is electric. It's a tie. The new record holder for dimmest star-like object in the universe goes to twin failed stars, or brown dwarfs, each of which shines feebly with only 1/1,000,000th the light of our sun. But if you had a little planet right next to it, that would be all it would need inside its plasma sheath. Comet, as we shall see, the notion of twin failed stars is a theoretical assumption and not a fact. Every single thing Standard Model does is a theoretical assumption. In the electric universe, there is no such thing as a failed star. They have no thermonuclear engine to fail. All bodies in the galaxy receive external electrical energy from the galactic circuit. Radio astronomers, for the most part unwittingly, trace the circuit by mapping the magnetic fields of galaxies and stars. These fields are generated by the electric current flowing in the circuit. The circuits are unrecognized due to the mistaken conviction that the magnetic fields can be frozen into plasma. It can't even be frozen into rock. It weakens. The father of plasma physics, Hans Elfing, appealed against this mistaken notion in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech in 1970. But to give up this false belief would require discarding decades of theoretical work, reputations, and Nobel Prizes built upon it. The report continues. Previously, astronomers thought the pair of dim bulbs was just one typical faint brown dwarf with no record-smashing titles. But when NASA's Spitzer Space Telescope observed the brown dwarf with its heat-seeking infrared vision, it was able to accurately measure the object's extreme faintness and low temperature for the first time. What's more, Spitzer data revealed the brown dwarf is, in fact, twins. Both of these objects are the first to break the barrier of 1/1,000,000th the total light emitted power of the sun, said Adam Bergasser of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Cambridge. Bergasser is a lead author of a new paper about the discovery appearing in the Astrophysical Journal Letters. Brown dwarfs are misfits of the cosmos. They are compact balls of gas floating freely in space. But they are too cool and lightweight to be stars, and too warm and massive to be planets. The name brown dwarf comes from the fact that these small star-like bodies change color over time as they cool, and thus have no definitive color. In reality, most brown dwarfs would appear reddish. Not much of a difference between red and brown, if they could be seen with the naked eye. Their feeble light output also means they are hard to find. The first brown dwarf wasn't discovered until 1995, while hundreds are known today. Astronomers say many more in space still waiting to be discovered. Comment: all stars are in an electrical phenomenon. There are no misfits in an electric universe. All of the assumptions being heaped upon the meager photos received from deep space merely serve, as usual, to force-fit the data to the standard model of stars. The very name, brown dwarf, assumes that these stars are compact balls of gas floating freely in space. In stark comparison, the electric model describes them as huge, because the light from a star is a plasma discharge phenomenon with only a loose relationship to the physical size of the star and a strong dependence on the electrical environment. Brown dwarfs do not simply cool down over time and wink out. They are externally powered electric lights. In December 1999, Wall wrote, "The apparent size and color of an electric star is an electrical phenomenon. If Jupiter's magnetosphere were lit up, it would appear the size of the full moon. The light of a red star is due to the distended anode glow of an electrically low-stressed star. Red giants are a more visible and scaled-up example of what an L-type brown dwarf star might look like close up." The report continues. Astronomers recently used Spitzer's ultra-sensitive infrared vision, which they shut Spitzer down, by the way, with no real explanation, to learn more about the object, which was still thought to be a solo brown dwarf. These data revealed a warm atmospheric temperature of 565 to 635 Kelvin, 560 to 680 degrees Fahrenheit. While this is hundreds of degrees hotter than Jupiter, it's still downright cold as far as stars go. In fact, it is one of the coldest star-like bodies measured so far. To calculate the object's brightness, the researchers had to first determine its distance from Earth. After 3 years of precise measurements with the Anglo-Australian Observatory in Australia, they concluded that the star is the 5th closest known brown dwarf to us, 17 light-years toward the constellation Antilla. This distance, together with Spitzer's measurements, told the astronomers that the object was both cool and extremely dim. But something was puzzling. The brightness of the object was twice what would be expected for a brown dwarf with its particular temperature. The solution? The object must have twice the surface area. In other words, it's twins, with each body sharing only half as bright, and each with a mass of 30 to 40 times that of Jupiter. Both bodies are 1 million times fainter than the Sun in total light, and at least 1 billion times fainter in visible light alone. These brown dwarfs are the lowest power stellar light bulbs in the sky that we know of, said Burgasser. And like low-energy fluorescent light bulbs, they emit most of their light in a narrow range of wavelengths. In this case, in the infrared. Comment. Burgasser's description of brown dwarfs as low-energy fluorescent light bulbs is the closest he comes to the truth. Like fluorescent lights, brown dwarfs require electricity, and the solution to the problem is simple. A single red dwarf with an extended red anode glow can provide the extra brightness without postulating an unlikely twin. The report continues. According to the authors, there are even dimmer brown dwarfs scattered throughout the universe, most too faint to see with current sky surveys. NASA's upcoming video field infrared survey Explorer mission will scan the entire sky at infrared wavelengths and is expected to uncover hundreds of these inconspicuous characters. The holy grail in the study of brown dwarfs is to find out how low can you go in terms of temperature, mass, and brightness, said Davy Kirkpatrick, the co-author of the paper at NASA's Infrared Processing and Analysis Center in California, Institute of Technology, Pasadena. This will tell us more about how brown dwarfs form and evolve. Comment. In an electric universe, stars do not evolve. The notion of stellar evolution and the age of stars is an invention of the standard thermonuclear model of stars. And for so long as scientists cling to an unworkable theory of stellar formation by gravitational accretion, new findings will serve only to add to the confusion. 2 + 2 = 7. I predict that further discoveries by the Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer in this category will require the same ad hoc assumption that the radiant surface area based on standard theory must be accomplished by multiple star systems. The odds against finding so many multiple systems will become astronomical. Success for the electrical model of white dwarf stars. Yeah, this is the same thing I'm talking about on Solaria. The main sequence is the backbone of the observations, but there are sharp discontinuities between the main sequence and giant stars and white dwarfs. In the standard thermonuclear model of stars, the explanations for these discontinuities are beset by many observational discrepancies and ad hoc patches. In the electric star model, such discontinuities are a natural feature of a plasma discharge. Main sequence stars operate like arc lights in a cinema projector. The plasma discharge at their photospheres is in arc mode. The main sequence is a direct result of increasing the current density at the surface of the star. The red supergiant Betelgeuse is dimming. Will the bright star Betelgeuse finally explode? A look at the dimming red giant in Orion's shoulder. It can't hurt to look up at the night sky, just in case. Well, one of the brightest stars in the sky has been dimming. But while it might be signaling that it's ready to explode, it's probably just fading because of strange stellar physics. Betelgeuse, a reddish star that's one of the brightest in the night sky, has been noticeably fainting or getting dimmer. The approximately 8.5 million year old star, which is part of the Orion constellation, has been one of the most recognizable stars in the sky because of its brightness and coloration. But this recent dramatic fading has prompted scientists to suggest that the star might be entering a pre-supernova phase, dimming before it collapses and dies in fiery supernova explosion. If the star does become a supernova, Betelgeuse, I know some people say Beetlejuice, I guess it's just a tomato thing, would likely be as bright as, or even brighter than, the moon for weeks. At 642.5 light years from Earth, it would be the closest supernova observed and recorded by humans, closer than the Crab Nebula, which is 6,523 light years from Earth, and is the result of a supernova reported to have taken place in AD 1054. This also means that if we see Betelgeuse explode tonight, the supernova really took place over 600 years ago. We're only seeing it now. It's a nice picture. Will Betelgeuse, or Betelgeuse, explode? The brightest stars in the sky. It'd be brilliant. The star would be so bright that it would make it difficult to see other stars near it. Edward Gininthal, a professor of astronomy and astrophysics at Villanova University, who reported the dimming in an astronomer's telegram, told Space.com it would be the brightest supernova ever observed in our galaxy. But will we really see Betelgeuse explode? A massive dimming star. It's not surprising that the extremely massive star, which is likely about 20 times the mass of the Sun, has been dimming, because it's a variable star, meaning its brightness naturally shifts, something that scientists have observed for decades. The star has been classified a red supergiant star because of its size. However, with this recent dimming, the star's brightness kept going down beyond the limits that we scientists ever saw. It went outside of its usual parameter or comfort zone, Gininthal said. It's dimming a lot more than we've seen. Serafina Nance, an astronomy graduate student who studies Betelgeuse and stellar explosions at the UC Berkeley, told Space.com, but does that dimming foretell an explosion? We know massive stars like Betelgeuse will explode as a supernova. The question is, when? There really haven't been close observations of them, supernovae, before they go off, Gininthal said. He explained that while some think that there wouldn't be any visible major changes in the star until just hours before it blows up, others think that it would start to dim about a year before exploding. There's no true consensus. While it's possible that the star could explode any time between now and 100,000 years from now, this dimming might not actually be a sign that it's about to blow. Both Nance and Gininthal said. That's a really nice picture. Shows you how much bigger it is than the Sun. Holy smokes, it's a monster. It almost looks like it's exploding now. If it looks like that. Oh, artist visualization shows Betelgeuse, and as it is revealed by new observation techniques with ESO's Very Large Telescope. Well, then show the images with the telescope. A false alarm? While he acknowledges that it could explode soon and this dimming could be a sign that the explosion may happen relatively soon, I believe it is going to blow up now, Gininthal said. Oh, I believe it isn't going to blow up now, Gininthal said. I hope it does, but my bet is that it's not going to. It's going to come back up, get brighter again. Nance admits we could absolutely be wrong. She said, referring to her theory, that the dimming is not a sign that the star is about to explode. That said, I do think that this is more indicative of really interesting physics that's going on with the star rather than an imminent explosion. If it does explode and we're wrong, awesome. I would love to be wrong. I would love to see that, Nance said. While it would be pretty amazing to witness the ultra-bright transformation of such an enormous and close star into supernova, Gininthal said it seems more likely that this dimming does not indicate a pre-supernova phase and can be explained in another way. Food for thought. What if the sun is connected to Betelgeuse and it gets its electrons from it? What would it do? Something to think about. According to Nance, they wouldn't want it to blow up then, would they? According to Nance, no one is exactly sure why this stellar fainting is happening. It could be caused by instabilities within Betelgeuse. She explained that different parts of stars can have different densities, and this density instability can cause energy to rise and fall within a star, moving energy from its inside to its outside. This, in turn, can cause changes in brightness, cause the star to get bigger and to contract, and much more. Nance added that this extreme dip in brightness could also be attributed to magnetic activity in the star. We know magnetic has to be electric, but it is difficult to model that activity through simulations, so they do not yet know if that is the definite factor. She even added that it's possible that matter ejected from the star is creating a sort of dust fog that's currently obscuring and dimming the star. The likely lack of nearby explosion might make this star seem less interesting, but Nance thinks just the opposite. I think that this is really interesting to watch and really interesting from a physics perspective of trying to better understand how massive stars experience periods of variability, she said. You should still look up. Now, while both Nance and Gininthal think that it's most likely that Betelgeuse is just displaying a dimmer appearance because of some interesting stellar physics, they also agree that an explosion in our lifetime is still possible. It's worth it to look up and look for the dimming star in the night sky. While I don't think it's going to explode anytime soon, Nance said, I'll keep my eye on it just in case. We don't know what's going to happen. Well, there are absolutely limits to our models, she said. I'm going to look up at the night sky and check that it's still there every time I go outside, even if it is in a pre-explosion phase. It's exciting to watch the star now as it dims. It's kind of neat to see astrophysics or astronomy and stellar evolution in action, Gininthal said. These changes are usually so slow that you can't observe them. Meet Elma. Amazing photos from the giant radio telescope. And that was from space.com. Thank you, space.com. And I had some comments. I'm not going to read them. Well, we believe that stars are electric, and when they're dimming, it's just like they're getting more juice and then getting less juice. It seems a lot simpler, doesn't it? Inside, take a star and a sunspot, and somehow mainstream astronomy, cosmology, has convinced people that the star is being lit from the inside when it's black on the inside of a sunspot. It's just impossible. Why is it that people can't put that wire together? It's pretty easy from where I'm sitting, and I'm not trying to make fun of anybody. I'm just saying that some people are so dogmatic in their beliefs that they refuse to look at the basic common sense of something. It's not their fault. It's just that we grew up believing that our teachers and our schools and our institutions were all honest with us and told us the truth. But we have come to find out that it is far from the case. We have been lied to just about every step of the way, or misinformed. So, I asked you, when you look at that and you say that's being lit by nuclear fusion going on in the core, how could it possibly be when over half the star is dark? It can't be. Now, coupled with that, the electrons, the 100-fold increase of electrons that Voyager found that are streaming into our solar system. They used a different word, diffused. They're streaming into our solar system, and they're feeding the sun. And it's right there. I mean, every aspect of the sun, which is a star, says that it's being lit from the outside and that it is electricity that runs stars.
Then above that you have the energy flow, and of course it's normal to expect that incoming electrical energy will excite the plasma out here first, and then as it gets into the more dense atmosphere it will exhibit discharge activity. Out here it's a coronal glow, in here it's normal electric arc phenomena. So the energy to heat the electric sun comes externally from the galaxy. The electric discharge becomes intense close to the sun, heating the thin atmosphere of the corona to millions of degrees. And the superheated corona is a familiar glow discharge phenomenon recognised by high voltage engineers. Now we come to the HR diagram. It's based on observations, it's not based on theory. It's a scatter plot, not an evolutionary plot, and the luminosity and colour of a star depends on its size and the current density at its radiating surface. Discontinuities exist. You've got white dwarfs over here, red giants here, and red and brown dwarfs, which are all discontinuous with the main sequence. These are all stars with bright photospheres, so they have that regulating mechanism. Of course, the astronomer's got it back to front. If you do a mirror image, then you have a more understandable arrangement where the stars get brighter and bluer as you increase the current density, so that you get this straight line curve, which is exactly what you'd expect. Red stars have to expand. That's both red dwarfs and red giants. They're stars which are not collecting enough electricity to satisfy the discharge, so plasma adjusts. It's like a living thing almost. It adjusts to its environment. And so it expands the anode sheath to collect enough current. And some of those anode sheaths are monstrous. You know, Betelgeuse, if that star was in our solar system, its photosphere reaches out to the orbit of Jupiter. White dwarfs, on the other hand, may be normal-sized star, but they have no bright photosphere. Their upper atmosphere is in direct contact with the plasma of space. They have only a faint white corona. Imagine if the sun's photosphere turned off, you would see this white envelope, very faint, but very white, very high temperature in appearance. So stellar evolution is a fairy story. This is V838 Monocerotis. This erupting star transformed itself over a period of months from a small underluminous star, a little hotter than the sun, to a highly luminous, cool supergiant star undergoing rapid and complex brightness changes. This was the quote of the article describing it. The transformation defies the conventional understanding of stellar life cycles. It's a very complex story. I've been through it, the theory of it. So here's a red giant. This is actually Betelgeuse. It's 500 times the size of the sun, and it has a hot spot. You've got to ask yourself, you know, what's a hot spot doing on a red giant star? What happens is as that envelope expands, the electric field grows stronger because it's trying to collect electrons from space. But on the other hand, positively charged particles, in other words, its stellar wind, are accelerated more strongly the other way. So you have this anomaly where these cool stars have the most powerful winds known. And if the stellar wind is being boiled off, so to speak, this doesn't make any sense at all. And Betelgeuse sports a hot spot. I've suggested it may be above one of its poles because one of the Alphane circuits shows that one of the connections of the electric circuit is to the poles of the star. So we may be staring at one of the poles. Giants and dwarfs. The usual story is that stars consume their fuel and change to giants or dwarfs. The story is complex, unverifiable, and regularly contradicted. This is another version of the HR diagram there. And astronomers are perpetually astonished by unexpected changes in stars. This is a white dwarf system. Sirius B is the white dwarf, and Sirius A, you'll see an optical light here. Sirius A is very bright in the sky, and Sirius B is almost invisible, and it's a faint white, so-called white dwarf. Now, if you look at it in X-rays, it's the reverse. Here's Sirius B, it's brighter than its optically bright partner Sirius A. This is what you'd expect, where the discharge reaches into the ionosphere directly of a star. The X-ray output is high, the visual light output is low. There's nothing special about that. It can be an ordinary star. It's just that its partner may have usurped most of the current. It's supposed to be a collapsed star at the end of its fuel. But how can an old and a young star be together? Because here you have an old and a young star, so to speak, under the conventional ideas, together. A white dwarf has no bright photosphere. Its white light and X-rays come from an intense corona. Here's the different star types. And I've shown how I think they would look. A red dwarf is actually quite large. In other words, it's like a red giant in miniature. A red dwarf was discovered and the astronomers decided it was putting out too much light for what they assumed was a dwarf star. So they said, oh, it must be a pair of red dwarfs of exactly the same size and power output. I suggested, no, it's a single red dwarf. It's just much bigger than anyone ever expected. Main sequence star, it is covered with photospheric tufting, tufted anode and a controlled discharge. Blue giants are a large star under high electrical stress. Red giants are a normal star under low electrical stress, and it develops a glowing plasma sheath. A white dwarf is a normal star in direct contact with space plasma and has low luminosity.
January 29, 2020. It's pretty current. Why is this red giant so puzzling? That's a very beautiful picture there. It was picture of the day, actually. Why is this red giant so puzzling? Betelgeuse is one of the 10 largest stars. If it accompanied the Sun's position, its outer envelope would exceed Jupiter's mean orbital diameter. It is so diffuse, however, that the orbits of the inner planets might not be affected. Red giant stars like Betelgeuse are relatively cool, but extremely bright, so they are thought to be large. However, in the electric universe, since they possess coronae, red giants might be small inside their energetic atmospheres. Betelgeuse is only about 2900 Celsius, so it creates problems with the thermonuclear model of stars. Such a cool temperature should not harbor an extreme radiative output. Red giants are old as astronomers measure age, since the so-called main sequence theory states that stars go through a well-established evolution. That evolution is said to follow a path that depends on thermonuclear fusion. Hydrogen gas is compressed in a star's core until it fuses into heavier elements. Therefore, a star's mass and its spectrum are thought to indicate its age, because these ratios of different elements is said to provide an idea of how long it took to convert its original substance into those other elements. Betelgeuse is notable for gigantic bubbles of hot gas that are in constant motion, bubbles as large as the star itself, since it has been observed to eject massive amounts of stellar material greater than 6 times its diameter. It has been proposed that Betelgeuse is undergoing violent vertical oscillations just beneath its surface. It is that energetic motion that is causing the hot gas to blast into space, just as bubbles in boiling water erupt with puffs of steam. Recently, the massive star is reported to be shrinking, or at least dimming, causing some confusion in astronomical circles. Since Betelgeuse is a variable star, that behavior is not unexpected. Sunspots are seen on its surface. However, there are only 2 of them occupying over 1/3 of its area. They are said to be the signature of heat transfer from the interior through matter convection. In other words, the star is acting like a pot of boiling water, a strictly mechanical phenomenon. The electric star theory provides another explanation, an explanation that relies on the electrical connection stars have with the galactic neighborhood and with the universe. Stars shine because electricity flows through each galaxy. As written many times, stars can be thought of as giant spheres of electricity. It is this simple hypothesis that best matches observational evidence. As mentioned above, red giant stars are relatively cool but extremely bright, so they are interpreted to be quite large. Dr. Donald Scott proposes that the giant characteristic is a result of a large corona and not because the stellar disk is oversized. Physicist and electric universe advocate Walt Thornhill also proposes an electrical model for Betelgeuse and red supergiant stars. In general, electric currents in space are primarily due to the flow of electrons through interstellar plasma, and not the movement of positive ions. This means that the stars are lacking in electrons. Because of a charge separation process, stars can be considered positive anodes in a galactic glow discharge. Therefore, red stars are those stars that cannot satisfy their hunger for electrons from the surrounding plasma, so the star expands the surface over area which it collects electrons by growing a large plasma sheath. That becomes the effective collecting area of the stellar anode in space. The growth process is self-limiting because as the sheath expands, its electric field will grow stronger. Electrons caught up in the field are accelerated to ever greater energies. Before long, they become energetic enough to excite neutral particles they chance to collide with, and the huge sheath takes on a uniform red glow. It becomes a red giant star. Betelgeuse is an electric star, and the bright regions are areas where electric currents are flowing with the greatest amperage. Stephen Smith. All right. Thank you, Stephen. That was excellent. It never fails. Thunderbolts never lets us down. And hopefully that will help you glean a little bit better of a picture on the super red giant Betelgeuse. It did me, and stars in general. Like I said, how can a star that's lit from its core have a black umbra in the middle of sunspots? It just doesn't make any sense. And it pretty much says it all to me. Plus the electrons that were found by Voyager and so many other things. There has to be an explanation. It can't just be ignored. Rare stars. July 24, 2019. Stars are conventionally thought to form in regions of high density. According to a recent press release from the Nobuyama Radio Observatory, astronomers detected 1,000 times fewer instances of starburst than their astrophysical models predict. Since common ideas about stars require them to form in regions where cold gas and dust are concentrated, the lack of those concentrations means there are fewer stars being formed in distant galaxies. Stars are conventionally thought to begin their lives in the collapse of cold gas under gravitational influence. Stars are vortices of compressed matter heated to fusion temperatures by pressure. In that view, clouds of gas and dust that are far less dense than a puff of smoke are consolidated by their slight attractions. Since the interstellar medium contains 10 atoms per cubic centimeter, on average, those clouds are scant. Indeed, the clouds coalesce, irrespective of their vague structure, gradually coaxing more material into shape. Eventually, the protostar can no longer resist the inward gravitational attraction, and it initiates a self-sustaining reaction. There is a catch, however. The gas and dust must be extremely cold. Otherwise, thermal radiation generated by the friction of collapse would cause the cloud to dissipate instead of squeeze down on the star. How the cold is supposed to prevent the star stuff from heating up is not explained. If something is cold, but then it is crushed into a tiny volume, its temperature will rise regardless of its initial state. Many astronomers admit that their theories are lacking, but they are the best they have. Some of the open questions regarding star formation are illustrative of the problems. How do massive stars form? Can outward radiation stop accretion? What drives star cluster formation? Where do molecular clouds come from? Are molecules necessary? What is the role of turbulence in star formation? What causes star formation on the galactic scale? As stated many times in previous Picture of the Day articles, the electric star theory provides solutions to the puzzles and confusion so often expressed in science journals. A fundamental aspect of the universe is that electromagnetically confined plasma, Bennett pinches occur, crushing plasma into tightly confined spaces. As the filaments become more narrow, the magnetic fields increase, compressing the plasma even more tightly. Eventually, the pinch effect causes plasmoids to form along the filament. Thus, stars are born. From an electrical parentage, Stephen Smith. And there you have it. Electromagnetism and celestial motion. Robert Millikan was asked whether he knew of anyone who had ever found a way of modifying or influencing the force of gravity. Millikan is said to have replied briskly, "Of course not. Such a thing is impossible and out of the question." Robert Millikan in Paul A. Lavallette's Secrets of Anti-Gravity Propulsion, Rochester, 2008. Velikovsky challenged the concept that only gravity affected celestial motions when he wrote unambiguously, "The accepted celestial mechanics notwithstanding the many calculations that have been carried out to many decimal places or verified by celestial motions, stands only if the sun, the source of light, warmth, and other radiation, is as a whole an electrically neutral body. Fundamental principles of celestial mechanics, including the law of gravitation, must come into question if the sun possesses a charge sufficient to influence the planets in their orbits or the comets in theirs. In the Newtonian celestial mechanics, based on the theory of gravitation, electricity and magnetism play no role." He further held that gravitation as an electromagnetic phenomenon. In that citation, Len E. Rose pointed out that Velikovsky had moved away from some of these positions. It should be noted that during the last 2 decades or so of Velikovsky's life, the ideas that had been expressed in Cosmos Without Gravitation, 4 Plans of the Universe, no longer reflected Velikovsky's approach to the extent that they once did. In particular, he backed off considerably from the idea of circumduction as a non-gravitational, non-inertial account, sufficient in itself to explain orbital motions. He also backed off from any general suggestions that gravity and inertia might somehow be banned from the celestial arena. He took such a pounding over it. What he often said in his later years was, not that gravity and inertia played no role, but rather that they did not play the only role. That is, that gravity and inertia were not alone responsible for what occurred in the celestial arena. Electromagnetic interactions also played a considerable role in cosmic events, especially when celestial bodies were in close approach to each other, but also even when they were far apart. In any case, each of the 4 plans of the universe, even the 4th, should be taken as a construction, a working hypothesis, for the purposes of discussion. Not as a final position. The same is true of Cosmos Without Gravitation. Not all of the ideas that were formulated in that early monograph were ones that Velikovsky continued to adhere to in his later work. Nevertheless, it must be emphasized that Velikovsky did not ever abandon the idea that gravity itself might eventually be interpreted as an electromagnetic phenomenon, nor did he ever abandon the idea that the solar magnetic field might, to some extent, be responsible for the fact that the planetary orbits are roughly coplanar. This, then, is the general concept that Velikovsky believed celestial mechanics rested upon. Nevertheless, before proceeding, it must be pointed out that Robert J. Shadwald, on the advice of one of Velikovsky's disgruntled followers, brought up Cosmos Without Collision and cited it without ever letting his readers know that Velikovsky no longer agreed with much of that material, but clearly, and anger-driven, claimed these were still Velikovsky's positions. Nevertheless, Velikovsky's electromagnetic concept is now out in the scientific community, and as we will see, it is growing. As was also pointed out above in the chapter on celestial mechanics, there are several aspects of celestial mechanics that cannot be correlated mathematically without Newtonian theory, but require an additional force, electromagnetic force, in order to operate. Miles Mathis, who well understood the depths of maniacal rage this Velikovskyan concept held for his critics, pointedly states, astrophysics, who would have to admit that Velikovsky was at least partially right, would rather tear out their eyeballs and eat them than go there. In terms of Freudian psychology, the great underlying neurotic problem of humanity is the Oedipal complex, as outlined by the Greek playwright Sophocles in his trilogy Oedipus. Oedipus, unable to deal with the fact that he had violated every moral aspect in his life, when discovering that he had actually done so, gouged out his eyeballs, unable to face his behavior. So too the scientists of this generation, according to Mathis, rather than admit Velikovsky was at least partially right, would rather tear out their eyeballs. Velikovsky was related. I'm just picturing that. Velikovsky has related a story he liked to tell. Once in the twilight hour, a visitor came to my study, a distinguished-looking gentleman. He brought me a manuscript dealing with celestial mechanics. After a glance at some of the pages, I had the feeling that this was the work of a mathematical genius. I entered into a conversation with my visitor and mentioned the name of James Clerk Maxwell. My guest asked, "Who is he?" Embarrassed, I answered, "You know, the scientist who gave a theoretical explanation of the experiments of Faraday?" "And who is Faraday?" inquired the stranger. In growing embarrassment, I said, "Of course, the man who did pioneer work in electromagnetism." "And what is electromagnetism?" asked the gentleman. "What is your name?" I inquired. He answered, "Isaac Newton." When Velikovsky awoke, on his knees was an open volume of Newton's Principia. This story is told to illustrate what I have said before. Would you listen to anybody discuss the mechanics of the spheres who does not know the elementary physical forces existing in nature? But this is the position adopted by astronomers who acclaim as infallible a celestial mechanics conceived in the 1660s, in which electricity and magnetism play not the slightest role. Let us first examine the reaction of the astronomers to evidence that electromagnetism plays in celestial mechanics, before looking at the experimental evidence related to it. This brings us the first part of the Velikovsky affair, when critics of Velikovsky's concept that electromagnetism plays a crucial role in celestial mechanics was debated and forcefully denied. What we will see is that in each and every instance, when a critic leveled a charge against Velikovsky's electromagnetic concept, and it was shown to be an error, and further the evidence instead supported Velikovsky, the critic never faced up to that counter-evidence and acted as if the counter-evidence never existed by retreating into a state of silence and denial. Let us now look at these early critics and the evidence. The first critic was Donald Menzel, director of Harvard College Observatory, as explained by Ralph E. Jurgens. In 1952, in the Proceedings of the American Philosophical Society, Menzel had offered calculations to show that if Velikovsky were right about the electromagnetic forces in the solar system, the Sun would have a surface electric potential of 10 to the 19th, 10 billion volts. An absolute impossibility, according to the astronomers. But in 1960, V.A. Bailey, emeritus professor of physics at the University of Sydney, claimed that the Sun is electrically charged and that it had a surface potential of 10 to the 19th volts, precisely the value calculated by Menzel. Bailey, at the time his theory was first published, was entirely unaware of Velikovsky's work and of Menzel's refutation of it. The idea that this quantitative refutation of Velikovsky's wild hypothesis, Menzel's own description of his contribution to the proceedings in 1952, should now be brought to Velikovsky's support, was intolerable to the Harvard astronomer. So when he mailed his paper to Harper's in 1963, he also sent a copy to Bailey in Sydney and asked him in a covering letter to revoke his theory of electric charge of the Sun. The theory was casting doubt on the continuing efforts of Menzel and other American scientists to discredit Velikovsky, and Menzel pointed out of what he conceived to be an error in Bailey's work. The mathematical error, to the contrary, had been made by Menzel. Nevertheless, when new scientific evidence supported Velikovsky's concept regarding electromagnetism, neither Menzel nor the rest of the astronomical physics establishment jumped at the opportunity of evaluating how it might operate, but instead tried to deny the evidence existed. Einstein agreed with Velikovsky, who said, "The real cause of indignation against my theory of global catastrophes is the implication that celestial bodies may be charged." He, Einstein, wrote in the margin, yes, just like the scholastic professors denied that Galileo's telescope showed Jupiter had 4 moons circling it. The entire scientific establishment denied that the Sun may very well carry a charge capable of affecting the orbits of the planets. There was no investigation, only flat-out denial. The second astronomer who criticized Velikovsky's electromagnetic concept in the early part of the Velikovsky affair was James Warwick, who specifically wrote a paper on magnetic stars that, like Menzel's, was supposedly a devastating calculation and rebuttal to Velikovsky. He claimed that the astronomers had been working with magnetic star motions for years, and found nothing to indicate their high magnetic fields had any influence on motion in this regard. The original criticism appeared in Chronos, Volume 10, Number 3, 1985, pages 10 and 11. My answer to Warwick was published 3 years later. Immanuel Velikovsky claimed that 2 magnetic stars orbiting at close quarters would not be influenced by gravitational interaction, but also by magnetic interaction. Earth and Upheaval, New York, 1955, Forum Address, page 297. Radio astronomer James Warwick calculated the influence of 2 magnetic stars, each of 10,000 Gauss, separated by 3 solar radii and aligned with their dipole moments directed toward each other to maximize the magnetic interaction. Based on his careful calculation, he could claim that the magnetic interaction between the magnetic stars was about 1 billion times smaller than gravity, far too small to influence the orbits of these bodies. We wish to challenge this conclusion, based on mathematics and physics, and offer observed evidence that denies the validity of Dr. Warwick's calculation and conclusion. The third instance of the early Velikovsky affair, wherein a critic attacked Velikovsky's concept that there was an electromagnetic force in addition to gravity operating, is Ivan King, an astronomer and one of the organizers of the 1974 AAAS Symposium on Velikovsky, who bluntly stated before the meeting was even held, "What disturbs the scientist is the persistence of these views, in spite of all the efforts that scientists have spent educating the public. It is in this context that the AAAS undertakes the Velikovsky Symposium. Although the symposium necessarily includes a presentation of opposing views, we do not consider this to be the primary purpose of the symposium. None of us in the scientific establishment believes that a debate about Velikovsky's astronomical electromagnetic force views would be remotely justified at a serious scientific meeting." Strangely enough, King's research deals with the behavior of globular clusters that are spherical in shape and are made up of 10,000 to 1 million mostly old red giant stars. There are a few hundred globular clusters in the Milky Way, with the greatest concentration of stars toward their central cores. Also unusual is that these globular clusters do not revolve about the galaxy as do the stars in the galactic disk on relatively circular orbits. Rather, these clusters have orbits that are highly elliptical, like those of most comets in the solar system. Globular clusters orbit toward and away around the galactic core. Furthermore, the orbits of the stars in these globular clusters do not orbit its core in circular orbits, but do so in orbits that are highly elliptical. This creates a major gravitational problem in explaining how these clusters can survive. Over time, stars will approach one another and gravitational interactions will accelerate one of them so greatly that it will leave the cluster forever. Therefore, these globular clusters should be shedding members and becoming ever smaller in size. However, when a star is kicked out of the cluster, it will remove gravitational energy or angular momentum with it and make up for this loss of gravitational energy. The star that interacted with the escaped one must move inward to counterbalance that loss. The law of conservation of angular momentum is fundamental to gravitational theory and demands this. Therefore, because the globular cluster is now somewhat smaller in size, the stars in it left behind will move closer to one another and will then repeat the interaction process again and again, sending stars out of the cluster while the cluster continues to contract. But, for some reason, this law of gravity is not working in these globular systems. King well understood this fundamental contradiction to gravitational theory and admitted this. Now, this not only relates to the hundreds of globular clusters in the Milky Way, but to the billions upon billions of other spiral galaxies with globular clusters throughout the universe. In other words, celestial mechanic equations cannot account for the failure of these fundamental laws to work as they should throughout the universe. Here, then, is how King dealt with this massive negation of the theory he claims disproves Velikovsky. Although globular clusters are obviously long-lived, they are not immutable. Slowly but steadily, stars evaporate, escape from the cluster as they reach escape velocity from the cluster during their interactions. The gravitational theory that adequately predicts the resulting evolution of the cluster is basically simple, but many of the details have remained elusive. The binding energy of a cluster holding it together is really an energy deficit, the energy it would take to accelerate all the stars to their escape velocity and tear the cluster apart. To reach escape velocity, a star must acquire enough kinetic energy to overcome the cluster's negative gravitational energy. Thus, the stars that escape are those with the most kinetic energy, whereas the amount of gravitational energy they contribute to the cluster is no more than average. As a result, the evaporation of stars increases the amount of binding energy per star remaining in the cluster as the cluster contracts. According to the current theory, it does not reach a steady state. Instead, energy from the contraction of the cluster is converted into kinetic energy of stellar motion, thereby heating the core. The core becomes more dense, and the stars in it near it remove more rapidly. Therefore, more stars evaporate, and the core continues to contract and heat without bound until it is infinitely dense. Donald Lyndon Bell, proponent of the theory, has dubbed this positive feedback phenomenon of the gravitational catastrophe.
Talking about brown dwarfs, if a brown dwarf gets close to a very bright star, the bright star is at a higher potential than the brown dwarf. That brown dwarf will actually switch off as a star and become a comet. It switches from being an anode in the discharge system to being a cathode, and there are quite distinct differences. Now, if the Earth, hypothetically here, if the Earth was a satellite of a brown dwarf, that radiating shell would be quite enormous. It could have all of the satellites of that object, that small star, orbiting within that envelope. That whole radiating envelope puts energy on the surface of any orbiting planet equally on every square metre. So that you would have no seasons, no day and night, and you'd receive ultraviolet light. This refers to what Dwadu was talking about the other day with the earliest memories of mankind. It suggests that we were in this situation, and astronomers in recent years have come to the conclusion that this is the more likely place for life to thrive. Where we are now is much more precarious. So brown dwarfs don't hang out with stars because electrically it's impossible. The other thing is that these brown dwarfs, unexpectedly, they flare. They throw material off occasionally because they've got no means of controlling their discharge other than to get rid of material, matter, charged matter. So that any satellites of these brown dwarfs gets occasionally drowned in water, an atmosphere, and also solid materials to cause layering on them. Brown dwarfs flare and deposit layered minerals on their satellites. There's a few more logical leaps involved in the electric universe, and I'll just go through a few of them. I asked the question, is gravity a weak electric dipole-to-dipole force between distorted subatomic particles? And this refers to something that Velikovsky said to me when I visited him, and also to Ralph Sainsbury's view that all subatomic particles have an orbital structure, a resonant orbital structure. And as Ralph has pointed out, magnetism then is also an electric dipole-to-dipole force due to transverse distortion of electrons or protons accelerated in an electric field. If so, the electric force is the only force necessary in physics, and this goes back to the way classical physics operated by trying to reduce the number of forces and ideas. And quantum effects imply that all matter has a resonant electrical substructure. Information and energy can be stored and transferred via these matter resonances, and that has significance in biological systems too. So astrophysical and biological coherence requires universal, near-instantaneous electrical interactions. All of the so-called spooky quantum things are no longer spooky if we accept this idea. We have a return of the ether. We must have particles to be able to transfer the energy and the forces through so-called empty space. Empty space, I suggest, is full of neutrinos. Neutrinos are the lowest energy state of matter. They exhibit vanishingly small mass. They're composed of subtrons, which is what Ralph called them. They form electric dipoles, that is the neutrinos, in an electric field, and each dipole rotates in the electromagnetic field of a light wave. That ties the speed of light in a vacuum to the moment of inertia of a neutrino. And neutrinos may reintroduce cause and effect to radioactive decay. At present, it's a purely statistical phenomenon. The other thing is that it also solves the difficulty of the so-called annihilation and creation of matter in particle accelerators. You cannot do it, but if the neutrinos are the substrate, they can accept energy and become a particle and its mirror particle. I don't use the word antiparticle because there's no such thing. It's all matter, normal matter. I put these few slides on the end because there was discussion about Venus and the transfer of charge, and I think it's important because it returns Velikovsky's gauntlet to him cordially. Velikovsky argued that planets change orbits, exchange thunderbolts, and quickly settle into peaceful orbits. Now, rapid settling after chaos defies Newton's laws, which, of course, that was the argument levelled against Velikovsky, which for more than a two-body gravitational system are chaotic anyway, so the astronomers have yet to explain why we have a stable solar system. So astronomers simply ignored the gauntlet flung down by Velikovsky. Then we have Anthony Peratt and the convergence of his work with ours some few years ago. And he showed, globally, petroglyphs show to a high degree of confidence that within human existence the Earth has suffered stupendous electric discharge phenomena from the heavens. And that's a picture of one of his papers. Now, if we accept Velikovsky's gauntlet, we need to look at Newton's law of gravity again and just have a think about what it really means. You'll notice there that G, I put its dimensions there just to show that it does include mass, and if mass is a variable, then we have a problem. It is simply assumed that G is the same for all bodies in the universe. In other words, the universal gravitational constant, and that was an assumption. Stellar and planetary structure and composition is based upon this premise, but if mass is a variable, can it explain cosmic pool? That book over there is by one of the Thunderbolts team, C.J. Ransom, The Age of Velikovsky. Of course, MOND is the latest buzzword in gravity theory, the modified Newton's dynamics. I've suggested that we can have electrically modified Newtonian dynamics. And I won't go through all that business there, you can see it on my website and so on. But the upshot is that the radius of the orbit of the planet is proportional to the mass of the planet if you keep the orbital energy constant and you assume the sun's G is constant, and I think that's a fair assumption. If the mass doubles, the orbital radius must double to conserve orbital energy. Now, I said earlier that all planets and stars and all celestial objects will form an electret. In other words, you have positive poles facing inwards and negative poles facing outwards. So it sets up an internal electric field. The planet acts like an electret, and any free electrons would tend to drift towards the surface. Like a subatomic particle under the stress of an electric field, the internal electrical stress modifies the apparent mass of the planet or star, and therefore its gravity. Exchanging charge at the surface through lightning, etc., changes the mass or gravity of a planet, and there is evidence for that. Coronal mass ejections, large ones which strike the Earth, actually change the rate of spin of the Earth suddenly, and then it decays back to its original speed, which is diagnostic of a change of the moment of inertia of the Earth by some means which hasn't been explained. Comet accelerations also. Cometry displays an obvious electric discharge phenomenon. Any body on an eccentric orbit about the Sun will experience discharge activity. The discharge will cause apparent non-Newtonian acceleration, and this is well known with comets. They're very hard to predict their precise return because of them. And this is because the mass of the comet is changing, something that's not taken into any account. However, gravity is still the operative force, but here we have a feedback mechanism which can modify orbits. So, changing planetary mass. The closer the encounter between two planets, and the more powerful the charge exchange between planets, the greater the orbital adjustments. It seems an efficient mechanism for collision avoidance and spacing the planetary orbits apart, which may explain one of the reasons why we survived Velikovsky's catastrophic scenario. The inner planet reduces its charge polarization, its mass, and the outer planet increases its polarization, mass, in the exchange. And I ask the question, is this possible? Yes, I believe it is. Because some years ago it was reported that a spacecraft here, the SOHO spacecraft, picked up stringy things, stringy plasma things, arriving from Venus when it was between us and the Sun. Now those stringy things, of course, are recognised immediately as Birkeland currents, and the Birkeland currents transfer electrons from Venus to the Earth. At present it has little or no effect on the Earth because of the distance and the low current density. So there's an intermittent circuit for transferring electrons from the inner planet to the outer when they're aligned with the Sun. The charge transfer is in the correct sense to induce the planets to move apart into orbits having electrical least interaction. Quickly it will appear as though the system operates according to Newton's laws with no sign of recent instability, and that was the problem that Velikovsky faced, and it was the question I asked him when I visited him. How do we deal with this problem? And I think this is the answer.
Thoughts occasioned by two recent announcements from Jerry Dunning Davies, Department of Physics, University of Hull, England. Abstract. Fairly recently, two announcements concerning astrophysical observations appeared. The first, from NASA, mentioned the fact that the Voyager 1 spacecraft had detected a 100-fold increase in the intensity of high-energy electrons from elsewhere in the galaxy, diffusing into our solar system from outside. The other revealed that a new all-sky map showed the magnetic fields of the Milky Way with the highest precision, and proceeded to point out that the origin of galactic magnetic fields remains unknown despite intensive research, although it seemingly assumed that they are constructed via dynamo processes, such as are said to occur in the interiors of the Earth and the Sun. Here it is pointed out that plasma cosmology, electric universe theory, can and does offer viable solutions to these and other supposed problems faced by orthodox cosmology. On December 5th, NASA announced that its Voyager 1 spacecraft had entered a new region between our solar system and interstellar space. All the details may be viewed at jpl.nasa.gov//news. In this announcement, one of the more interesting comments is that Voyager has detected a 100-fold increase in the intensity of high-energy electrons from elsewhere in the galaxy, diffusing into our solar system from outside. This comment is of interest because, apart from the word diffusing, it describes what the electrical model of our universe expects in the virtual cathode region of the solar discharge boundary. Also, on December 6th, it was revealed that the new all-sky map shows the magnetic fields of the Milky Way with the highest precision. It was claimed that the origin of galactic magnetic fields remains unknown despite intensive research. They're not going to get it until it swims up and bites them on the ass. Although it was seemingly assumed that they are constructed via I already read that shit. Some years ago, in an entirely different context, Sir Winston Churchill advised people to learn from the lessons of history, and in the present context, it might seem appropriate to follow this advice in astrophysics. Hence, in this spirit, it might be noted that following the introduction of Newton's mechanical ideas, work still proceeded apace investigating electromagnetic phenomena, and this continued at least into the earlier years of the 20th century, as is evidenced by the contents of J.J. Thomson's book Electricity and Matter. However, this book provides but one example to illustrate the very real emphasis on work involving the effects of the electric and magnetic fields. Work which, incidentally, constantly sought an explanation for the concept of mass in terms of those forces. However, after those early years of the century, the emphasis seems to have shifted to explanations of phenomena purely in terms of gravitational effects, considering that it is accepted that much of the matter in the universe is in the form of plasma. This seems a retrograde step. One may only speculate as to why the emphasis of much scientific research changed in this way. However, thanks to people like Birkeland, Alfvén, more recently Peratt, work in the areas of electromagnetism and plasma physics has continued. The work on plasmas and other electromagnetic phenomena has inspired people to examine astronomical phenomena in these terms, and this has resulted in the so-called electric universe idea as expounded, for example, in the books The Electric Universe and The Electric Sky. Reading through this material makes one immediately aware that, just like accepted theory, the electric universe ideas are supported by computer modeling. But it is also able to draw on parallels between astronomical phenomena and plasma phenomena in the laboratory. Admittingly, drawing such parallels involves scaling up tremendously, but assuming this is possible is little different from assuming that laws seemingly applicable here on Earth are also applicable in the solar system, and indeed throughout the universe, at least visually. Some of the phenomena observed in the laboratory, like what is observed by some of the most powerful telescopes. Electric currents in plasma naturally form filaments due to the so-called pinch effect of the induced magnetic field. Electromagnetic interactions cause these filaments to rotate about one another to form a helical Birkeland current filament pair, and this is very much the structure seen in the double helix nebula near the galactic center. Again, the Hubble image of the Planetary nebula, NGC 6751, looks remarkably like the view down the barrel of a plasma focus device. Examples such as these prove nothing, but might awaken people to the possibility of alternative explanations for at least some astronomical phenomena. Much of the laboratory work originated with the work of Christian Birkeland more than 100 years ago. It was during his Arctic expeditions at the end of the 19th century that the first magnetic field measurements were made of the Earth's polar regions. His findings also indicated the likelihood that the auroras were produced by charged particles originating in the Sun and guided by the Earth's magnetic field. What Big Bang? The Big Bang is already dead. The unheralded Galileo of the 20th century, Altmeyer, has proven that the universe is not expanding. The Big Bang theory is based on a misinterpretation of redshift. The redshift of a distant galaxy is measured in the light coming from that galaxy. Lines in the spectrum of that galaxy show a shift toward the red compared with the same lines from our Sun. ARP discovered that high and low redshift objects are sometimes connected by a bridge or jet of matter, so redshift cannot be a measure of distance. Most of the redshift is intrinsic to the object, but there is more. ARP found that the intrinsic redshift of a quasar or a galaxy took discrete values, which decreased with distance from a central active galaxy. In ARP's new view of the cosmos, active galaxies give birth to high redshift quasars and companion galaxies. Redshift becomes a measure of the relative ages of nearby quasars and galaxies, not their distance. As a quasar or galaxy ages, the redshift decreases in discrete steps, or quanta. The huge puzzle for astrophysicists is why a galaxy should exhibit an atomic phenomenon. When you have four bodies immersed in the same plasma, all with different redshifts, that only leaves one explanation, that redshift is non-cosmological or intrinsic. So we turn to particle physics. This difficulty highlights the fact that quantum mechanics applied to atoms is a theory without physical reality. The weirdness of quantum theory has been attributed to the subatomic scale to which it applies. But now that we have quantum effects in something the size of a galaxy, this convenient nonsense is exposed. If ARP is right, many experts are going to look very silly. His discovery sounded the alarm in some halls of academia, and since nobody likes a loud noise, particularly if they are asleep, the knee-jerk response was to attack the guy with his finger on the alarm button. ARP's telescope time was denied, papers rejected. He was forced to leave the U.S. to pursue his work. Electric galaxies. For more than 10 years, plasma physicists have had an electrical model of galaxies. It works with real-world physics. The model is able to successfully account for the observed shapes and dynamics of galaxies without recourse to invisible dark matter and central black holes. It explains simply the powerful electric jets seen issuing along the spin axis from the cores of active galaxies, Recent results from mapping the magnetic field of a spiral galaxy confirm the electric model. On the other hand, cosmologists cannot explain why spiral shapes are so common, and they have only ad hoc explanations for galactic magnetic fields. More recently, intergalactic magnetic fields have been discovered, which is the final straw to break the camel's back. Incredible gravitational models involving invisible black holes. Incredible gravitational models involving invisible black holes have had to be invented in a desperate attempt to explain how the attractive force of gravity can result in matter being ejected in a narrow jet at relativistic speeds. Why do we accept such science fiction as fact when an electric universe predicts spiral shapes, magnetic fields, and jets? The cosmic magnetic fields simply delineate the electric currents that create, move, and light the galaxies. Then we come to the main event, electric stars. Plasma physicists argue that stars are formed by an electromagnetic pinch effect on widely dispersed gas and dust. The pinch is created by the magnetic force between parallel current filaments that are part of the huge electric currents flowing inside a galaxy. It is far more effective than gravity in concentrating matter, and, unlike gravity, it can remove excess angular momentum that tends to prevent collapse. Stars will form like beads on a wire until gravity takes over. The late Ralph Jurgens, an engineer from Flagstaff, Arizona, in the 1970s, took the next mental leap to suggest that the electrical input doesn't stop there and that stars are not thermonuclear engines. This is obvious when the sun is looked at from an electrical discharge perspective. The galactic currents that create the stars persist to power them. Stars behave as electrodes in a galactic glow discharge. Bright stars, like our sun, are great concentrated balls of lightning. The matter inside stars becomes positively charged as electrons drift toward the surface. The resulting internal electrostatic forces prevent stars from collapsing gravitationally and occasionally cause them to give birth by electrical fissioning to form companion stars and gas giant planets. Sudden brightening or a nova outburst marks such an event. That elucidates why stars commonly have partners and why most of the giant planets so far detected closely orbit their parent star. Stellar evolution theory and the age of stars is an elaborate fiction. The appearance of a star is determined largely by its electrical environment and can change suddenly. Plasma physicists and electrical engineers are best able to recognize plasma discharge phenomena. Stellar physics is in the wrong hands.
Solar electrical effects. The sun's surface is carpeted with complex magnetic fields. Only electricity can produce magnetic fields, therefore the sun must be understood in terms of electric circuits. Where are these circuits and what creates them? And what sustains them? Plasma physicists know that the movement of different types of plasma past one another will generate currents in the plasma. When you get back to first causes, we do not know. We don't even know the right questions to ask at this stage of our ignorance, I would suggest. Sunspots are an embarrassment in the thermonuclear model. They have powerful magnetic fields with the same polarity spots clumped together. Now, normally the same polarity magnetic fields push one another apart. However, the magnetic field here is a signature of the Birkeland currents piercing the photosphere. And the pinch effect means the magnetic field is very intense in sunspots. They are drawn together because parallel currents attract. It's as simple as that. Ampere's law. Their darkness, structure and behaviour have required great ingenuity in attempts to explain them, yet they remain mysterious. I asked the question, does this sunspot penumbra, this is where you can see edge on to the photosphere and look deeper into the atmosphere, or the ionosphere I should say, of the sun. And I asked this question, does this sunspot penumbra look like turbulent boiling hot gas? And I would say not. It has structure, it has a motion which doesn't look like boiling material coming up from the interior of the sun. And why is the sunspot dark if the sun is hotter beneath? It should be blindingly bright because we're trying to get that 15 million degrees energy out through this hole which is looking deeper into the ionosphere of the sun. The simplest answer is that the sun is thousands of degrees cooler below. And remember I said stars are formed with cool cores? They're not formed with hot cores. They could never have any nuclear reactions in their core under those conditions. Here we come back to Birkeland. This man was amazing. He wrote, it might be imagined that the interior of the sun formed a positive pole for enormous electric currents. So there's your electric sun. This assumption has the advantage of appearing to give a natural explanation of the movement of the sunspots in various latitudes. This experiment has been repeated back in the 60s, and depending on the current input, those spots move in latitude, which is exactly what we see. So the sunspot movement across the latitudes on the sun is a measure of the changing input to the power input to the sun. In this case, he wrote, the origin of the sunspots must be that the presumptive more or less insulating photospheric envelope was sometimes pierced by disruptive discharges. I couldn't believe it when I read that. Thus forming great electric arcs. I would say he was the first one to actually tell you what a sunspot is. And that was from his huge tomes called the Norwegian Aurora Polaris Expedition, published in 1902, 1903. What do we find today? This is the sun in ultraviolet light, and you can see that we have an equatorial view at the top and a polar view at the bottom. And it has a plasma torus about it, and this is exactly what Birkeland had found in his experiments, that you get a plasma torus, and it's a storage ring, it stores energy. When that energy gets to a certain level, a massive discharge will take place from that torus to the surface of the body, and it follows the magnetic field lines. In the extreme case, when there's too much energy in that ring, it may actually switch to a polar jet. Many stars have polar jets. I suggest that these long filaments in the penumbra are actually electrical tornadoes, thousands of kilometres long. They have bright edges, dark cores and a twisted appearance. And there's a special effects fire here with a helicopter engine above, and fire is injected at the bottom. And you can see the bright edges here and the dark core. And you can see these filaments here. It's exactly what they've got. And bright lightning flecks the tops of the granules. These are the solar granules that we see covering the sun. So the sunspot cycle, you see the sun in X-rays and it is a variable star. It almost winks out at solar minimum, and at solar maximum it is much brighter. And X-rays are a direct measure of electrical activity. The sun is connected to a galactic circuit which is subject to quasi-cyclical change, so that the origin of the sunspot cycle is beyond the solar system. It may be due to alphane waves in the Birkeland currents that feed the solar system, or it could be due to the actual motion and rotary motion of the Birkeland currents past the heliosphere. Seen in X-rays, the Sun is a variable star, and yet the heat and light from the Sun is constant to within 0.1%. An explanation is very important, for it explains why most bright stars shine steadily. And it's not like the 4th of July. An electric sun, this is something that Don Scott pointed out, because he's an electrical engineer and knows this stuff inside out. He said this voltage curve here across the photospheric tufts, those long filaments that we saw a moment ago, is that of a PNP transistor. In other words, this tufted sheath of our sun forms a barrier for protons escaping the sun, because those protons trying to escape the sun have to climb this barrier here before they can go down this waterfall and excite the corona to its tens of millions of degrees temperatures. And beyond here, there's a slight electrical field, just enough to accelerate the solar wind the way we see it. Of course, this then is a regulating mechanism, because just a small shift in voltage up and down here is enough to modulate the power output that passes through these tufts. And that is the regulating mechanism for all bright stars that have a photosphere. That's why they shine steadily in the night sky. There is no regulating mechanism for a thermonuclear model star. In fact, they're the most unstable things you could imagine, because some of the reactions vary with temperature to the 5th power. Here are these strange things called spicules, and Ralph Jurgens didn't shrink from trying to explain these as well. And it turns out that to maintain a steady discharge through that tufted sheath, there has to be a balance between the number of electrons travelling one direction and the number of positive ions going in the other. And these spicules actually provide the material to be ionised in the chromosphere and maintain a steady discharge. There's an analogue in some arc lamps, the kinds of things used in searchlights. They had porous anodes to actually produce this steady arc. Don Scott, this is his diagram from his book, The Electric Sky. It's the solar transformer. The greatest puzzle of the Sun, its magnetic field reversals, is solved. The Sun has magnetic fields induced by a varying DC power input, and so acts like a power transformer with an impressed DC current as well. So all you've got is a varying DC current, which is driving the Sun. Remarkably, once again, here he is, Christian Birkeland proposed that solar magnetism was caused by electric currents induced in the conductive interior of the Sun. Hey presto. He should have got a Nobel Prize, several of them. Solar neutrinos match the no thermonuclear engine inside the Sun. It's not important, but it's just one of the questions that arise. Neutrinos produced in the dense photospheric plasma, because these are pinches, is where the nuclear synthesis takes place. So stars produce their own heavy elements. You don't have to have supernova explosions to do it. A supernova explosion actually distributes the material that the star has already formed. A neutrino count falls when the sunspots reduce the photospheric area. So the higher the number of sunspots, the lower the number of neutrinos, which is what you'd expect if this second point is correct. So we need not assume a change in flavour of neutrinos, whatever that means. In other words, a change in resonant state of the neutrino en route from the solar core, because the reactions in those plasma filaments is much more complex than the standard hydrogen to hydrogen chain reaction would provide. Now, stellar and planetary structure and composition are based upon the erroneous conviction that Newtonian big G is a universal constant. So when I say that this Sun has a heavy element core, of course the helioseismologists would say, but you know, our models show that it hasn't. But they're basing their model on a completely erroneous idea about the amount of matter in our star or any celestial body. If big G is a variable dependent upon the electrical state or the electrical tension in a body like the Sun, then we cannot say what it's made of. We have no way of knowing except by observing material that comes from it. And if the Sun is cool, there is a radial internal electric field to be considered, because, as I said before, all the positive charges are heavier than the negative charges. So in a gravitational field there would be an offset and a radial electric field, so all celestial bodies behave like electrets. These internal electric fields can actually respond to disturbances and cause the ejection of large quantities of core material. In other words, form planets and moons and so on. The electric sun has a completely different picture. Here we have a cool core, we have an extensive atmosphere and an ionosphere at the top, and at the very top of that ionosphere is this global lightning or electrical tornado system, packed cheek by jowl.
Give a summary of my interest and position in the debate about the Saturnian configuration. I was one of the early science undergraduates in the late 50s who had read Velikovsky's works before in the halls of academia. To my surprise and profound disillusionment with quote-unquote experts, I soon discovered that this was not so. I then began to do what Dave has done and looked for further evidence, working on my own. So far as I know, I was the only science undergraduate who haunted the anthropology section of the library bookshelves. It was enough to convince me that there was a major case to be explored for a recent rearrangement of the solar system. I did not pursue the mytho-historical threads, since my first love is astronomy, but I have applied the same principles in that field that Dave has done in his work. That is, pattern recognition and matching. The results have been very encouraging and interesting. I should state my prejudices concerning the present state of science. I would characterize the scientific age as being the age of Homo sapien ignoramus. To be specific about our ignorance in the areas most likely to affect the Saturnian configuration, I would list the following. Gravity. Einstein, with his geometric description of gravity, has held back understanding by the better part of a century. The most promising work in explaining gravity is being done by a handful of classical physicists who see it as a minute imbalance in electrostatic forces associated with fundamental particles. The recent announcement of the accidental discovery of gravitational shielding by a rotating superconductor seems congruent with the classical approach. It certainly could not be predicted from the current metaphysics of gravity theory. Electrical discharges. This is crucial. We do not understand what causes earthly lightning, so we are unlikely to acknowledge plasma discharges in space. The little plasma physics that astronomers are taught is flawed. The plasmas are electrically neutral and superconducting. They trap magnetic fields. So apart from gravity, magnetism is the only other force we hear about. We are told that energetic events on the sun are due to magnetic reconnection, whatever that means. The strongest force, barring nuclear, electrical, is never mentioned. We find it easy on Earth to generate X-rays using electric discharge, but astronomers insist on nature doing it the hard way in space. It is also not generally known that electrical discharges are very efficient at removing material against gravity and dumping it into space or onto another nearby object. Stars. We do not understand what makes them tick. As Ralph Jurgen said in the 70s, practically every feature of our sun has no business being there if it is purely a thermonuclear engine radiating into space. Magnetic fields do not occur without an associated electric current. The sun is essentially an extended conducting plasma subject to electric stress. The phenomenon we call the sun is purely a ball of lightning. That the Earth and other planets intercept some of the galactic plasma discharge is shown by the recent discovery of diffuse stratospheric discharges, sprites, X-rays, and gamma rays above earthly storms. This is a precise analog of the corona, X-rays, chromospheric glow discharge, and photospheric lightning. Granulations are the tops of the discharges on the sun. The umbra of a sunspot gives us a glimpse of the true temperature of the body of the sun. As a result of this realization, it follows that the conventional stellar evolutionary story is pure fiction. Stars are what they are because of their environment. Their variability is caused by their environment, not their internal workings. This explains the speed with which some stars change their characteristics. Heavy elements are not built up slowly in supernovae, but at the surface of all stars, in the non-thermal compression and acceleration of plasma discharges, granulations. Hence, nucleosynthesis and what little neutrino production there is fall as the sunspot number increases. The differential rotation of the Sun, its magnetic field, and the sunspot cycle are all influenced by the Sun's passage across large Birkeland currents, flowing along and defining the arms of our galaxy. Planet formation. The Laplacian theory and its variants are garbage. The Hubble Space Telescope has shown that in regions of star formation, large bodies are being shot out as if from a gun, which is peculiar if gravity is the operative force. Once again, plasma discharges provide a mechanism which can simply explain this. The view is that diffuse hydrogen and dust is efficiently scavenged and compressed by the well-known magnetic pinch effect of an electric current flowing along the arms of a galaxy. At some point, gravity takes over and stellar objects are formed. Beyond a certain size, protostars become electrically unstable in fission, spitting out some of the core and giving rise to one or more companions. So I still think that the Herbig-Haro objects might have something to do with the formation of planets as well. So there seems to be more than one way for a planet to be made. But when we're looking at planets, it's very possible that we could be looking at the core of a star. That's interesting. This explains the predilection for stars to be found in pairs or multiples. Got that right. Not all the matter ejected from the core of a protostar may coalesce into a companion star. It may be in the form of one or a number of gas giants. The recent discovery of a Jupiter-like body orbiting very close to a nearby star argues strongly for this model and against the standard theory. A gas giant, in turn, due to either internal or external electrical disturbance, may fission, spitting out its core to give rise to the highly condensed planets, moons, asteroids, comets, etc. Cosmology. All of the above gives rise to the conviction that cosmology should be in the hands of the plasma physics experimenters, not the theorists. It is ironic that they have been chasing the holy grail of fusion power, just like the sun, when that is patently wrong. Interestingly, a recent breakthrough in fusion energy research came about in my hometown, Canberra. When the researchers configured their plasma discharge in the form of a Birkeland current ring, a precise analog of that flowing along the arms of our galaxy. But astronomers will continue to be surprised by results pouring in from space probes when their fundamental paradigms rest on Newtonian and billiard ball physics. The current paradigm has no predictive power whatsoever. The book The Big Bang Never Happened by Eric J. Lerner is a pointer to the cosmology of the 21st century. So what are the patterns that apply from all of this to the Saturnian configuration, SC? The following are some ideas. 1. The core discharge mechanism of planet formation is a plausible way to generate the SC, a string of objects with the largest near the middle. It's a Saturnian configuration, SC. 2. The reliance on the degree of electrical stress in the enveloping plasma for the characteristics of the larger bodies enclosed in that plasma could see rapid changes occur, even the disruption of one of the stellar or gas giant objects. It could certainly involve jets of material being emitted by such bodies and forming a diffuse cloud enveloping the polar configuration. It could also be the destabilizing influence which finally breaks it up. 3. As seen in the high-speed objects shooting out of the Orion Nebula, plasma discharges take place in the core of a star, or gas giant, can result in considerable acceleration of the resultant debris. This may provide some of the source of the energy required to position Jupiter and Saturn much further out in our solar system. The redistribution of charge amongst objects in the solar radial field also requires that their orbits will change. 4. Charged bodies orbiting eccentrically in a radial electric field around the Sun will dissipate energy through electromagnetic induction, heating, in such a way as to quickly spiral into a circular orbit. For any object with a high eccentricity, electrical breakdown will occur within its Langmuir sheath, and cometary discharge phenomena will be seen, regardless of its size. Venus. 5. If gravity is essentially an electrostatic phenomenon, the unusual environment of the Saturnian configuration could be expected to have caused a difference in the perceived gravity at the surface of the Earth. It is conceivable that the electric stress within the plasma sheath enclosing the SC was less than that which the Earth endures in its current solar environment. This would result in an effective lower gravity. The breakup of the SC would have caused a sudden change. An interesting sidelight to this idea is that the apparent very low density of Saturn may be due to the use of a universal gravitational constant in the determination. There may be no such thing. Measurements of G in laboratories on Earth don't seem to agree. In Saturn's electrical environment, we may have shared an apparent low gravity. 6. Various odd phenomena associated with plasma discharges would have been observed from Earth and should appear in ancient depictions of the SC. These include helical, serpentine glows surrounding a central column, or twined rope-like around each other. These would be representations of Birkeland currents flowing between planets enveloped in the same plasma sheath. The number of strands may have varied and given rise to the depictions of Venus with different numbers of radians. We should also look at the photographs from deep space of exploding stars for clues to the imagery, since they are electric discharge phenomena writ large. 1. They could possibly look like rings around the column, or a series of flared skirts. Another effect is seen in discharge tubes filled with low-pressure gas, where a series of light and dark bands are formed transverse to the discharge axis. This might give rise to a kind of stairway to heaven or ziggurat appearance. Then there is the self-contained plasmoid, a corkscrew within an overall football shape, which forms the interplanetary equivalent of lightning and appears to have been depicted as Zeus' thunderbolt. I have looked in some detail at chondritic meteorites, which I expect to be leftovers from a planetary discharge event. They show all the characteristics to be expected of material that has been subjected to flash heating, acceleration, collision, and ion implantation in a spatially restricted, compressed gas stream, together with isotopic modification by enhanced radiation, followed by sudden cooling, all the symptoms of a plasma discharge. I predicted that the features of the enigmatic chondral shells could be reproduced in the lab in a plasma oven. A planetary discharge is a very effective way for Martian meteorites to have been created. Very strong evidence for planetary electrical scarring comes from the Magellan orbiter images of Venus. Also, the Jovian moon Europa was presumably a part of the Saturnian configuration, and would also have been subject to electrical scarring. I predict that when close-ups of Europa are available in December, the so-called cracks in the ice will be found to be electric discharge channels, with the raised levees on either side of the dark light, dark cross-section caused by discharge modification of the excavated material, in the manner of the green glass beads formed from the melted soil excavated by an electric discharge along the lunar rails. The cracks on Europa show no lateral displacement where they intersect, though displacement would be expected if they were due to shifting ice. Discharge channels will throw material from the younger channel into the older where they intersect. Cracks should not show this characteristic. After that, I need a long cold Foster. Wall Thornhill. The solar system as electrical. The sun, as star, radiates energy into the space surrounding it. Stars can be conceived to have originated from electrical cavities in the structure of space. Space, to our mind, is an infinite electrical medium. It is electrical in that it is everywhere occupied by a charge, which, when it moves, assumes the character of electrons, that is, negative charge, See Note B. The movement energizes, carries material into the cavities which become and are the stars. Such electrical cavities or stars are observed in the millions and infrared in the billions, in a fairly random distribution about the Sun. They form a lagoon of stars that is called the galaxy, through which the Sun moves in a manner and with consequences to be described in the next chapter. Materially, a star is an agglomeration of all that has accompanied the inflow of electrical charges from surrounding space. The cosmic dust, which astronomers see throughout the galaxy, is matter yet to be forced into stellar cavities, or matter that has been expelled after a star dies. This dust is detected in greatest amounts in the vicinity of the most highly active stars. Once in the cavity, the material cannot readily escape. It acquires increasing density because of electrical chemical binding and electrical accumulation. The cavity, or star, is increasingly charged, but during its lifetime, it cannot be more charged than the medium around it. The Sun is highly charged, as some scientists have lately concluded. Bailey, 1960. The life history of any new star may normally proceed as its cavity acquires first matter, then charges continuously until its charge density reaches equilibrium with the surrounding medium, which is to say that the cavity has then been filled. Thereupon the star releases or mixes its material with the medium until it no longer possesses distinction as a body. This normal procedure is conditional upon the stars transacting with the space around it in a uniform manner. The majority of stars seem to transact quietly with their surrounding space. Whether they are small red stars or giant red stars, they end their existences as they lived, quietly passing their accumulated material into the medium of space, eventually becoming indistinguishable from the medium itself. However, the fact that the star is in motion within the galactic medium possesses an occasional problem. It may journey into regions of the galaxy which present it with greater or lesser electrical differences than it has been used to. Then quantivolution occurs. The star becomes one of the types to which astronomers pay the most attention: the variable stars, highly luminous stars, binary stars, the exploding stars. It was in one such adventure in space that the original super-sun lost its steady state, fissioned, and became Solaria Binaria. The system then consisted of a number of bodies acting first as small suns, with the primary partner as is to be related in Chapter 4. In recent times, according to the central theme of this book, this Solaria Binaria encountered a galactic region whose characteristics rendered the lesser stellar partner of the system unstable. In a series of quick changes, the binary was transformed into today's solar system. So basically, he is saying that all of the planets and the Jupiter, which was its binary star, came from the sun itself when it was a super sun. I get it. I thought that he was going to perhaps talk about the Saturn theory, but I don't think he's going to go there. We'll see. I mean, we're just reading a different take, you know. Bruce, 1944, sees the process of stellar evolution as a cyclic buildup of electrically charged atmosphere above the star. As we see it, galactic potentials will determine the nature of the surface presented to the outside observer. As the star journeys through galactic space, its surface nature changes in response to differences in galactic potential. A change in the local galactic environment can lead to an instability, which results in catastrophic electrical redistribution of the whole stellar atmosphere, and sometimes of material found well beneath the star's surface layer. In short, the star becomes a nova. In this cosmogony, Bruce argues that binary stars form by division of an original stellar nucleus. When the star becomes a nova, the returning nova discharge, transacting electrically with the normal outward flow of equal or greater than stellar wind off the star, induces the outburst star to rotate. A possible reverse jet blast from the explosion might also cause the rotation to occur. Stars then should have a maximum rotation during the nova outburst. Fission of the star into a binary would then logically happen most frequently by rotational fission, Koppel 1938. Immediately after a nova outburst, close binary pairs should be found among the post-nova stars. The solar system is probably the descendant of a supersun, a body containing at least 11% more material than the existing sun, which became electrically unstable and underwent a nova explosion. When the supersun erupted as a nova, it divided into a close binary pair, whose primary became our present sun, and its companion was a body about 10% the size of the sun. See Littleton, 1953. Henceforth to be called Super Uranus. I did see Super Uranus. Enveloping the binary was a cloud of solar material constituting at least 1% of the sun's material. Also created in the fission were the seeds which grew into the so-called inner or terrestrial planets. Probably Mars, the Earth, Mercury, and one that will be called Apollo. Apollo's fate is discussed in Chapter 15. Turning our attention to the Sun itself, we observe an opaque layer called the photosphere. This layer is regarded ordinarily as the Sun's surface. Above the photosphere lies the transparent solar atmosphere, which is difficult to observe. First comes the equal or greater to the chromosphere, and then the corona. Perhaps the key to star behavior is the dysfunction between the photosphere and the chromosphere, which is examined and known by means of spectroscopy. Spectroscopy, that is, by observing and measuring its spectrum of equal or greater than radiation. The spectrum of the photosphere shows radiation produced when the atoms are equal to or greater than the ions and electrons of the photosphere collide, and therefore the spectrum reflects the state of atomic collisions there. The light is emitted during the collisions. It appears that the photosphere is a region of plasma and atoms where the motion of the material is chaotic, randomized. Collisions occur after short, mean, free paths of electrical accumulation. The electrical field is small. A high kinetic energy of collision is registered and the temperature of 7,000 degrees. Energy is transmitted with some, but not great amounts of conversion of energy into internal atomic structures, excitation. By contrast, the spectrum of the chromosphere represents the release of the eternal energy of exited atoms and ions. Light is emitted not so much at the moment of collision among atoms, but it is cast off by rapidly accelerating atoms, moving to and from collisions, that is, between rather than during collisions. The chromosphere is a region of directed, vertically moving electrons descending into the photosphere, and atoms and ions escaping into the corona and the solar wind. Mean free path is long. By contrast, the spectrum of the chromosphere represents the release of the internal energy of excited atoms and ions. Light is emitted not so much at the moment of collision among atoms, but it is cast off by rapidly accelerating atoms moving to and from collisions, that is, between rather than during collisions. The chromosphere is a region of directed vertically moving electrons descending into the photosphere, and atoms and ions escaping into the corona and the solar wind. The mean free path is long. Just read that page twice. Not short. The electrical field is large, not small, as in the photosphere. The photosphere, thus, is a region where the transmission of energy is observed. The chromosphere is a region where the transmutation of energy is what is observed. The temperature measurements of the two regions are not helpful in understanding the dynamics, because in one case temperature is low, where short paths lead to frequent collisions, and in other temperature is high because of infrequent long path collisions. But as important is the contribution of each region to the electrical system of the sun. Cooler regions called sunspots. The average sunspot lasts less than a day. Bell, 1975. Viewed by telescope, the whole photosphere, except where sunspots obscure it, shows a granular appearance. These granules are bright patches, hot tufts of gas that live for only a few minutes. Jurgens, 1979. The photosphere and the behavior of the solar atmosphere which lies above it can best be explained using a model based upon the electrical processes. Bruce, 1944, and later Jurgens, 1972, and Crew, 1974, have shown that photosphere granules have the properties of a large number of parallel electrical arcs. Further, Jurgens maintains that highly energetic electrons are transmitted from the galaxy down through the solar atmosphere to the photosphere. As in the Earth's atmosphere, the gas density and pressure in the solar atmosphere decrease with height above the photosphere, where the atmospheric pressure falls to a value equal to 1% of the atmospheric pressure measured at the Earth's surface. Collisions between gas atoms can no longer dominate the exchange of energy between atoms. Instead, it is the electrical processes that govern the energy exchanges in the solar gas. We see this transition as the hot chromosphere. The bladed or spicule structure of the chromosphere consists of jets of gas moving upwards at about 30 kilometers per second. These spicules rise some 5,000 to 20,000 kilometers above the photosphere, Abell, 1975. Instabilities in the arc discharges lead to a buildup of charged regions in the solar atmosphere. These eventually produce electrical breakdown. Sudden discharges occur, causing bright faculae and the temporary extinction of some photosphere arcs. The result is a sunspot. The upper atmosphere of the Sun is apparently intensely hot corona. The gas atoms of the corona have been stripped of several electrons by collisions with inflowing energetic cosmic electrons. The removed electrons are drawn towards the Sun, so other ions can flow outwards into the corona, allowing the coronal ions to recede into the solar wind. The spectrum of the lower corona shows the atoms stripped of several electrons emitting light between collisions, and the emission from the energetic electrons during collision. Sudden explosive eruptions called flares occur above the solar surface. Energy in the form of light, atoms, and ions is accelerated away from the Sun. The energy in a single flare could supply the Earth's population electrical power for millions of years. A large flare releases in an instant about 1/40th of the continuous solar output. Flares start near sunspots with associated faculae and develop over hours. They move as if driven by an electrical potential difference between the Sun's surface and the higher atmosphere, Zurin and Abeshi. Once accelerated, the flare gases escape the Sun and modify the solar wind significantly. The cause of flares is baffling to conventional theories, which underplay electrical forces and cosmic processes. Most flare models involve some kind of magnetic driver to blow the gases from the Sun with great force. Babcock. The presence of magnetism implies an electrical source. As we shall show in Chapter 6, the Sun once had an electrical connection to its companion, within which energy was released that created and sustained life within the binary system. Today's flares represent an undirected remnant of the inner companion arc of yesteryear. The solar wind consists of coronal gases which have been boiled away from the hot solar atmospheric discharges. It conducts the Sun's electrical transaction with the galaxy. It is the Sun's connection to the galaxy. The electron-deficient atoms, ions, by escaping from the solar system, increase the negative charge to the Sun. This brings the Sun towards the galactic neutral, and thus, in time, would end the Sun's life as a star. It follows that in the past, when the Sun was less negatively charged, more current flowed from the Sun to the galaxy. Thus, the present flow of solar wind is less than the flow in ages past when the Sun was more out of equal spheric discharges. It conducts the Sun's electrical transaction with the galaxy. It is the Sun's connection to the galaxy. The electron-deficient atoms, ions, by escaping from the solar system, increase the negative charge to the Sun. This brings the Sun towards the galactic neutral, and thus, in time, would end the Sun's life as a star. It follows that in the past, when the Sun boiled away from the hot solar atmospheric discharges, it conducts the Sun's electrical transaction with the galaxy. It is the Sun's connection to the galaxy. The electron-deficient atoms, ions, by escaping from the solar system, increase the negative charge to the Sun. This brings the Sun towards the galactic neutral, and thus, in time, would end the Sun's life as a star. Can I hear that one more time? It's rather important. It follows that in the past, when the Sun was less negatively charged, more current flowed from the Sun to the galaxy. Thus, the present flow of solar wind is less than the flow in ages past when the Sun was more out of equilibrium than it is now. The solar wind varies with the ongoing evolution and quantivolution of the Sun. In the past, the solar wind flow was very complex because we believed that the Sun was a binary star and its companion, Super Uranus, was not in electrical equilibrium with it. The system eventually approached internal neutrality because a large solar wind, electrically driven, flowed directly between the two principles.
I believe any lasting contribution of the Safire project is going to be in its raw data and hard empirical evidence. Correlating the data from Safire with the latest data from deep space is not as straightforward as it might sound. The Herschel and Planck millimeter telescopes have sent back new images of our galaxy's interstellar medium that have many in the astronomical community reeling. It is as if you're riding along and someone pulls a wheel off your bicycle. We are struggling to make sense of this data. It simply does not fit with our previous theories. The previous theories need to be abandoned or severely modified. I think we might need new models. Empirical science requires rigorous adherence to strict rules of process and discovery.
Plasma, the Orion Nebula. Just briefly read it, and I'll leave a link in the description to the article. Rather than simply clouds of dust and gas, spiraling filaments and nebulae suggest electric currents in space. The Orion Nebula is faintly visible to the naked eye as the second star in Orion's sword. Is it sword or sword? It looks somewhat fuzzy because it is not a star, but a multi-light-year wide cloud of interstellar dust and gas. The astrophysical community sees several formations with the nebular cloud to be star-forming regions because they have detected high-frequency light from many active areas. Gamma rays, X-rays, and high-frequency ultraviolet are being emitted by what have been termed cosmic eggs because they appear to be the glowing tips of condensed gas balls that have ignited in fusion reactions. No. Conventional astronomers don't know how stars throw off clouds of gas and dust that eventually become other stars because stars are not made of gas and dust. A star is the focus of Birkeland currents that make up circuits flowing around the galaxy. The electromagnetic pinch that squeezes plasma into the star also forms a toroidal current around the star's equator. The density of the current causes plasma in the ring to glow. The electric universe explanation is that we are looking at plasma structures when we look at nebulae, and they behave according to the laws of electric discharges and circuits. Instead of mechanical action and cold dust, the Orion Nebula's radiant new stars were created in a boost of electric current. It is not necessary to prevent young stars from heating up by shielding them in cold dust. The electrical sheath around a new star receives input from the galactic Birkeland currents, in which it is immersed and gets pushed into glow-discharge state. Gravity has little, if anything, to do with the process of star formation. The consensus view is that cold dust is a necessary ingredient when stars condense out of nebulae. When gas and dust start to collapse into a new star, it naturally warms up and radiates energy. As the theory states, outward pressure is created that opposes the inward force of gravity. If the outward force wins and overcomes the force of gravity, the atoms in the gas will never be compressed enough to undergo nuclear fusion. However, if the dust in the nebula is cold enough, it allows the heat created in the gravitational collapse to be radiated away. Therefore, a new star can ignite. On the other hand, when the electric universe theory is considered, cold nebulae are evidence of electrical activity even at temperatures near absolute zero. That would be superconductor. Bipolar symmetry is typical of most nebulae, and most of them are dense enough to emit light because they are extremely hot in some regions. But the middle of the Orion Nebula is cold. Radio measurements indicate the dust clouds around the inner part are only 1 degree above absolute zero. We are able to see the center of the nebula because dust particles reflect light from the star. The filamentary structure of the fingers and the way the filaments spiral away from the central stars indicates Birkeland currents, named after Christian Birk, who first proposed their existence in the late 1800s. He was made a laughingstock. Turned out that he was correct. It seems to be a trend in science. These currents form scalable tubes of plasma that can transmit electric power all around the galaxy. Electromagnetic forces sometimes cause them to pinch down to smaller and smaller sizes. Plasma confined within the center of the pinch is crushed and increases in current density until the so-called Z-pinch produces a star. Plasma surrounding the star will often glow as an emission nebula, but in some conditions, opacity and density, the surrounding plasma can be cold, as in the Orion Nebula, revealing its presence only in infrared light. The correct model for a nebula is a neon lamp that emits light only at the excitation frequency of that specific gas. Electricity passing through the tube causes the neon plasma to glow a pale yellow. Astronomers say a shock wave from a supernova is able to initiate many frequencies of light due to the heat of compressed gas. But since more than 90% of the light from planetary nebulae is in the frequency range of ionized oxygen, then they should be thought of as oxygen discharge tubes and not as clouds of gas. Astronomers have infected physics with the hot gas theory, causing a 50-year failed experiment with nuclear fusion. Squeezing hot gas into a volume small enough for fusion to take place has not worked, and we predict that it never will work. The theory of star formation through fusion reactions is untenable, so utilizing the theories of plasma behavior might be a more productive path. Stephen Smith.
One of the most interesting phenomena in the sky is the so-called pulsar. The pulsar is an object that is observed to put out pulses, both of light and radio activity, RF, in the RF spectrum. And those pulses are extremely rapid. They are something like milliseconds apart. So it's like a extremely fast strobe light. And thinking of a strobe light, astronomers immediately leapt to the lighthouse kind of analogy. Something that must be spinning around, the beam is going around, and it's going around so quickly that this thing goes flash, flash, flash. Well, once the repetition rate of the pulsars was observed to get up to in the millisecond range, that meant that this star that was putting out this beam of radiation would have had to be rotating at 300 times a second. And 300 times a second, we're talking about the speed of a dentist drill. So the astronomers decided, well, normal stars couldn't possibly rotate at that speed, and so they postulated the existence of what they called a neutron star. A neutron star is a star that is so dense that it holds together so well that it can indeed rotate at the speed of a dentist's drill. Well, the problem is that in nuclear chemistry, we know that you can't pack neutrons together that densely. They will all fly apart instantaneously. There's a principle called the island of stability in nuclear chemistry that absolutely prevents that. So here again we have the standard astronomers or astrophysicists going directly against another well-developed science. In the electrical model, however, there's a very simple explanation for pulsars. Everybody is familiar with the idea that the pulses can travel back and forth on electrical transmission lines. Such uncontrolled pulses, for example, were responsible for the famous Northeast blackouts. A similar effect can occur between two binary stars connected by a plasma. The two binary stars act like
the enigmatic
capacitors
whiteout
that store charge. And if you reduce that in size to something you can produce in the laboratory, you can produce it in the laboratory, and it's called a relaxation oscillator. And electrical engineers use it and have used it for decades. The idea of producing pulses every few milliseconds is a sophomore level experiment in an electrical engineering laboratory. It doesn't require neutronium, strange matter, or any other fictitious device. All it requires is two capacitors, a battery, and a nonlinear resistor. And we maintain that that's exactly what a binary pair of stars connected by a plasma field presents. A typical ion in the solar wind, hydrogen nucleus, moving about 20 kilometers per second, which is relatively slow for the ions in the solar wind, in the magnetic field of the sun, experiences potentially magnetic forces that are something like 10 million times the strength of the gravitational force on that same ion from the sun. An interesting demonstration that illustrates very readily the relative strength of magnetic force and gravitational force is the simple idea of a ball bearing sitting on a wooden table. The entire mass of the Earth is pulling downward on that little ball bearing, and that's what prevents it from flying out into space. But a child can come along with a little horseshoe magnet and click, pick that ball bearing up instantly.
February 17, 2015, charged plasma surrounds the solar system. Electric sun theory presupposes that the sun is a glowing anode or a positively charged electrode. Its oppositely charged cathode is invisible, a virtual cathode called the heliosphere that exists billions of kilometers from its surface, where a double layer isolates the sun's plasma cell from the galactic plasma that surrounds it. Galactic plasma is otherwise called the interstellar medium, ISM. Electric forces work within a double charge layer above the sun's surface, generating active plasma phenomena that are seen by orbiting solar probes, as well as ground-based instruments. Celestial bodies interact through conductive plasma and are connected by circuits, so the sun is also assumed to be electrically connected with the galaxy. The sun can be thought of as an unstable, electrically charged object seeking equilibrium with its environment. Charges flowing into and out of the sun can sometimes increase to the point where it releases plasma discharges called solar flares. Conventional scientists think that solar flares and their associated coronal mass ejections, CME, are caused by magnetic loops reconnecting with each other, causing a short circuit. Magnetic reconnection is a poorly constructed theory, but it is the only explanation offered by heliophysicists. A dark mode plasma emission is constantly radiating from the sun, traveling at a speed of 700 kilometers per second when it is at its most energetic. In a gravity-dominated universe, solar radiation pressure cannot explain how charged particles from the sun accelerate past Venus, Earth, and the rest of the planets. Prior to the solar wind's discovery, no one expected such acceleration. Electric universe proponents think that there is an obvious explanation: electric fields in space. Coherent electric charges flow through the solar system, so it is reasonable to conclude that dark mode solar plasma is affected by electrodynamic fields. Since the circuit that connects the sun with the Milky Way extends for hundreds of thousands of light years, electrical energy is probably constrained by magnetically confined Birkeland currents, providing power to the solar anode. The electric sun creates flares, the hot corona, and all other solar phenomena because it responds to the charges and electrical input from our galaxy. Birkeland current filaments electrify the solar system, supplying more or less power to the sun. As they oscillate, the power output. As they oscillate in power output, arc mode, glow mode, and dark mode discharges are all influenced by those flowing electric charges. These ideas most likely hold the reason for what scientists call the local hot bubble, LHB, that surrounds the solar system. A recent press release states that detectors have located a field of million-degree interstellar plasma that initiates an X-ray glow over the entire sky. NASA astrophysicists found that the X-ray background is radiating most strongly in the plane of the Milky Way. According to their theories, it is in that region where X-rays ought to be absorbed. NASA astrophysicists found that X-ray background is radiating most strongly in the plane of the Milky Way. According to their theories, it is in that region where X-rays ought to be absorbed. As Massimiliano Galeazzi from the University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida stated, this is a significant discovery, specifically the existence or non-existence of the local bubble affects our understanding of the area of the galaxy close to the Sun, and can therefore be used as a foundation for future models of the galaxy structure. Electric universe theory has already presented information that can partially explain galactic structure and its influence on the solar system. So it doesn't seem really to be anything that they're that concerned about. It seems that it is normal. That's what powers our sun.
And you can see these filaments here. It's exactly what they've got. And bright lightning flecks the tops of the granules. These are the solar granules that we see covering the sun. So the sunspot cycle, you see the sun in X-rays and it is a variable star. It almost winks out at solar minimum, and at solar maximum it is much brighter. And X-rays are a direct measure of electrical activity. The sun is connected to a galactic circuit which is subject to quasi-cyclical change, so that the origin of the sunspot cycle is beyond the solar system. It may be due to Alfvén waves and the Birkeland currents that feed the solar system, or it could be due to the actual motion and rotary motion of the Birkeland currents past the heliosphere. Seen in X-rays, the sun is a variable star, and yet the heat and light from the sun is constant to within 1/10 of 1%. An explanation is very important, for it explains why most bright stars shine steadily. And it's not like the 4th of July. An electric sun, this is something that Don Scott pointed out, because he's an electrical engineer and knows this stuff inside out. He said this voltage curve here across the photospheric tufts, those long filaments that we saw a moment ago, is that of a PNP transistor. In other words, this tufted sheath of our sun forms a barrier for a thermonuclear model star. In fact, they're the most unstable things you could imagine, because some of the reactions vary with temperature to the 5th power. Here are these strange things called spicules, and Ralph Jurgens didn't shrink from trying to explain these as well. And it turns out that to maintain a steady discharge through that tufted sheath, there has to be a balance between the number of electrons travelling one direction and the number of positive ions going in the other. And these spicules actually provide the material to be ionised in the chromosphere and maintain a steady discharge. There's an analogue in some arc lamps, the kinds of things used in searchlights. They had porous anodes to actually produce this steady arc. Don Scott, this is his diagram from his book, The Electric Sky. It's the solar transformer. The greatest puzzle of the sun, its magnetic field reversals, is solved. The sun has magnetic fields induced by a varying DC power input, and so acts like a power transformer with an impressed DC current as well. So all you've got is a varying DC current which is driving the sun. Remarkably, once again, here he is, Christian Birkeland proposed that solar magnetism was caused by electric currents induced in the conductive interior of the sun.
The enigmatic whiteouts on the active surface of Temple 1 were everything the electrical theorists could have asked for. And the most prominent were placed exactly where the electric model envisions them, eroding the cliffs of mesa walls and extending the floors of numerous craters and depressions.
Titled Stellar Mystery Deepens. A Monash University-led research team made an unexpected discovery that a large group of stars are dying prematurely, challenging our accepted view of stellar evolution. Their results revealed that large numbers of helium-burning stars are dying prematurely in the M4 globular cluster. Professor Latanzio, until they become energetic enough to excite neutral particles they chance to collide with.
Proposed in 1979.
And we behave as infants. We give far to generate ultraviolet light and X-rays when they hit atoms in the atmosphere, and the power dissipated is capable of raising the temperature of a thin plasma layer to tens of thousands of degrees. The spectral lines are broadened, sometimes to the point of disappearance, due to the coronal electric field. This gives the misleading impression that hydrogen, whose spectral lines are smeared the most, is missing in many of these stars, and that therefore they are remnants of larger stars that have conventionally lost or burned their hydrogen fuel. So, globular clusters are not some of the oldest objects in the universe. Their spherical shape of a dense collection of stars and their elliptical orbits about the galactic centre hint at a quasar-style birth process from the plasmoid at the heart of the galaxy. If so, the electromagnetic environment inside the globular cluster is different to that in open clusters of stars. So we should expect an unusual distribution of white dwarfs and red giant stars. And the puzzling observation that some globular cluster stars have 100 times more iron than others could also be explained by electromagnetic sorting of elements within the globular cluster at its birth. The fact we don't understand stars in the 21st century highlights what Arthur Koestler wrote in The Sleepwalkers. The history of cosmic theories in particular may without exaggeration be called a history of collective obsessions and controlled schizophrenia, and the manner in which some of the most important individual discoveries were arrived at reminds one more of a sleepwalker's performance than an electronic brain's. Science is still in its childhood, and we behave as infants. We give far too much credit to scientists for knowing what they are talking about.
For continuous updates on space news from the electric universe.
We have become lab rats for the pharmaceutical industry and the medical and food technologists. Far worse, publicly funded research has been corrupted by industry, influencing government and regulators to shut down research into alternative modalities on the basis that they're impossible. Never listen to an expert when they say something is impossible, because they're the last to know when a paradigm shift is about to come. Here's one I took out of a magazine. talk about misleading. See a difference, GMO corn and non-GMO corn? Neither can science. Well, that says a lot about the blindness of science. It's certainly not an argument for GMO corn, given our limited understanding of living systems and the interconnectedness of everything. Genetic engineering is an experiment with unknown consequences, since it relies on a flawed understanding of genetics. They're only beginning to get involved in epigenetics, that is the changing of the genetic information in a living creature during their lifetime. We have great hulking molecules of DNA with an unknown number of genes that interact with one another in unknown ways under circumstances we don't know. That's terrific. Really gives you confidence, doesn't it? I should point out too that we have less genes than a nematode and less than a grape. This gives you an idea that the morphogenesis of an embryo has more to do with signals from outside, and the DNA is more or less a factory floor acting under instruction. So all you need in the DNA is the instructions on how to make things, in other words, the coding for the proteins and so on. But what switches them on and off is something that really needs to be investigated. I'll talk more about that later. It assumes a closed system, and as I said, yet epigenetics shows that gene expression is somehow tuned to environmental signals. Science hasn't figured out yet what all of those junk sequences do. When they say junk, it just means I don't understand. Once again, we're treated as lab rats to a whatever cells culture with no thought of the consequences in such an unfathomed ecosystem. Here we go. To know the future, don't ask an expert. And this is Richard Feynman. Learn from science that you must doubt the experts. As a matter of fact, I can also define science another way. Science is the belief in the ignorance of experts. I mean, when you look at the history, it's dreadful. Ignaz Semmelweis could offer no acceptable scientific explanation for his findings, and some doctors were offended at the suggestion that they should wash their hands between the autopsy room and the delivery room. I mean, you think about it now, it just seems incredible. I would also say that the words debunk and labelling dissidents denier shows the agenda to be unscientific. Debunking is a case of selecting the evidence to suit your argument and ignoring the evidence that doesn't fit. It's the sort of thing that skeptics do. Yeah, it's impossible that washing hands between the autopsy room and the childbirth ward will prevent deaths from puerperal fever. Heavier than air flying machines are impossible. Cold fusion is impossible. I saw a show of hands on a television interview with the experts, and there was one guy who was obviously the alpha male, the dominant one, and he put his hand up and he looked along like this, waiting for the others to put their hands up, and the others sort of, finally put their hands up. So this is how you do science. It's a media show. Of course, homeopathy is impossible. But if you don't understand structured water and Jerry Pollack's work, of course it's impossible. And also the transfer of information faster than light is impossible, isn't it? And yet the Earth manages to maintain its orbit around the Sun by knowing where the Sun is at this instant, not 8 minutes ago. Future science. Sir Fred Hoyle. The future is a different universe. They do things electrically there in the electric universe. Now, he didn't say that. What he did say is, it's a strange thought, but I believe a correct one, that 20 or 30 pages of ideas and information would be capable of turning the present-day world upside down, or even destroying it. I have often tried to conceive of what those pages might contain, But of course I am a prisoner of the present-day world, just as all of you are. Well, not us. We cannot think outside the particular patterns that our brains are conditioned to, or, to be more accurate, we can only think a very little way outside, and then only if we are very original. That was in his book Of Men and Galaxies. In future, we may appreciate that we are earthlings with an intimate connection and responsibility to this pale blue dot. I thought that picture was rather evocative, and when it was first published, I thought, surely people can get a better perspective on our situation on Earth instead of battling amongst ourselves for, a few square inches of land. It just seems so insane. In future, these changes are essential if we are to have a sustainable future on this planet. Because for those who saw that program last night by the mythographer David Evans, Dr. David Evans, he himself stressed this, that we are currently living with a Bronze Age mythology, with all of its gods and heroes and wars and so on. And this is the basis of our present culture. He says we need a new cosmology, and he found us, the electric universe, and said this is the only one that fits. It discards the old cosmology because you can understand it, and once you understand it, it no longer has a grip on you. The electric universe provides a cosmology which is about connectedness, our understanding of our real place in the universe for the first time, and of our real history and that of the Earth. Once you understand those things, science fiction stories pale into insignificance. Future science, there is nothing more important for the human race than to know its past, to be able to face it. This was a quote from Emanuel Velikovsky in a documentary made by the BBC in 1972. And as Eric Onziger, who is a great critic of the Large Hadron Collider, says, with each paradigm shift there should be a simplification. Well, the electric universe has got that in spades. And as Dr. Ian McGilchrist says, meaning comes from understanding the whole, the big picture. And I think that's been my obsession almost all of my life, is trying to see that big picture, seeing the whole. Connectedness, which gives us the ability to see our place in the world more clearly, is also the key to happiness. I believe that's true too. I've never seen such a bunch of happy people as I do at these conferences. And science and technology may flourish with more wisdom and mastery. Future science is about us, not about things. Thank you. So we're treated more or less as chemically driven machines.
August 1st, 2019. Why are stars so unalike? If everyone is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. George S. Patton. It is a mystery to astronomers why stars exhibit such distinctive characteristics. Because the stars, include the Sun, are thought to form from the same mix of elements in a nebular cloud, or protoplanetary disk. It is thought by consensus astronomers that the universe was created out of the largest structures imaginable. Tremendous clouds and sheets containing millions of proto-galaxies that subsequently become smaller, which then evolved into individual galaxies. According to the present understanding, it is thought that the Milky Way galaxy condensed out of a cloud of hydrogen and dust thousands of light years in extent, with a more or less homogeneous blend throughout. Only minor variations existed: hydrogen, helium, and some trace elements organized into a great whirlpool-like structure that is currently thought to contain almost 1 trillion stars. When the stars near the Sun are examined, they reveal the same variability among them, even though they are all considered to be siblings. The 20 stars closest to the Sun in light years are, and there's the list: Proxima Centauri 4.2 light years, down to COD minus 3615,693, 11.7 light years from Earth. Such vivid imagination. Each star is different from the Sun and from each other. Ross 248, for instance, is a red dwarf star, while Sirius A is a main sequence star 2 times the Sun's mass. Although a few other stars in the list are red dwarfs, like Proxima Centauri, they are each unique in their spectral signatures. Various elements are not distributed in the same way as the other spectrograms. Since the initial protogalactic cloud was undifferentiated overall, other stars near the Sun should all be cut from the same cloth and contain similar chemical constituents. Surveys out of hundreds of light years, encompassing the nearest 6,000 stars, reveal that they are all different from one another, just like people. Some with more helium than others, some with more helium than their ages will allow, some with more iron than they should have, and other compositional oddities. Stephen Smith, man, he's a writer. Using the annual parallax produced by viewing the displacement as the Earth orbits the Sun of any nearby star against the background of very distant stars. The parallax measurement involves measuring the minute angle at the apex of an isosceles triangle, whose base is the diameter of the Earth's orbit about the Sun. Parallax angles are very small. The closest star, Alpha Centauri, is only displaced through 1.52 greater than arcseconds, or 1.52 arcseconds over the year. Man. This parallax, the largest, was not measured until 1839, R.H. Baker. Parallaxes are difficult to measure, and they cannot be determined for stars further from Earth than 652 light years. Such a small distance encompasses only 1,000th of the sphere of stars under close observation by astronomers. Thus, the majority of reported star distances and luminosities are derived by theory rather than measurement. Of the 21st magnitude stars, apparently brightest stars in the sky, only 5 are closer than 26 light years. The next 5 take us to 84 light years, the next 7 to 217 light years, and the next 5 to the measurement limit. In this sample are 6 supergiant stars. The parallax of one of these stars is only an estimate. 2 of the others are at the extreme limit. The last 3 are between 171 and 192 light years distant. None of the most luminous supergiant stars are in this sample. Thus, all luminosities given for such stars are estimates. Even where parallax is measured, the measurement is rarely precise. Uncertainties of 25% and larger are common, leading to luminosities which are most likely erroneous in the order of at least 56%, about half a magnitude unit. Near the measuring limit, the possible deviations grow immensely, often exceeding considerably the number measured. The famous Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, the Rosetta Stone of modern astronomy, plots stellar luminosities against surface temperatures determined from the star's spectrum. Since the spectrum is often difficult to classify, Placement on a star on a diagram is not always easy. R. H. Baker. To circumvent the difficulty, astronomers now rely upon color indices in place of spectrum classes. Such measurements are even more strongly theory-dependent than the former in terms of their applicability to stellar emissions. See Weiss, page 49. They are more quantitatively formulated, and therefore they lead to an unjustified sense of satisfaction with the computed result of the stellar condition. For our purpose, they offer no help. What we would say about the classification of stars is the following. In going from stars whose surface temperature appears to be high to those which appear cooler, there is a gradation of the lines present in the stellar spectra. The hotter stars show absorption produced by helium atoms. As we look at progressively cooler stars, the helium lines decline and abruptly hydrogen lines appear. They increase in intensity and slowly decline. As the hydrogen declines, the lines of the metals and metal ions increase in intensity. Through the solar-type stars, they dominate in stars slightly cooler than the Sun, only to be surpassed in the coolest stars by band spectra produced by various simple molecules, notably hydrides and oxides. And some of the coolest star compounds of carbon are prominent. Although astronomers may continue to seek a more precise classification for stars, we are content to employ the traditional spectral types for the present study. Besides the Hertzsprung-Russell diagram, that is to classify the stars, astronomers have also divided the stars into populations according to their location within the galaxy. Some striking results were obtained. One of my favorite nebulas of all time, the famous Eye of God Nebula, I believe it is called the Helix Nebula, may actually be weeping tears of water. It's one of the most iconic celestial images in astronomy. The eye, like Helix Nebula. Ironically, the incredibly harsh conditions within this dying sun-like star, are producing a molecule integral for the formation of water. A process that could be repeated across the cosmos. Planetary nebulas consist of an expanding, glowing shell of ionized gas ejecting from old red giant stars late in their lives. The core becomes a hot white dwarf, pouring out ultraviolet radiation into its surroundings. This radiation can be so intense that it can actually destroy molecules that have been thrown out by the star. Molecules bound up in the rings of material seen at the outer edge of planetary nebulas. Water-building molecule in Helix Nebula. Astronomers surmised that this harsh radiation restricted the formation of new molecules in those regions. But it now appears that this is not only incorrect, it may contribute to a process that generates a molecule responsible for the formation of water, a molecule known as OH+, a positively charged combination of a single oxygen and hydrogen atom. Oh, I said charged. A new study by Isabel Eilman of the University of Leiden, the Netherlands, shows that planetary nebulas, when exceeding temperatures of 100,000 degrees Celsius, produce OH+. We think that a critical clue is in the presence of the dense clumps of gas and dust, which are illuminated by UV and X-ray radiation emitted by the hot central star. Noted Eilman in an ESA statement, this high-energy radiation interacts with the clumps to trigger chemical reactions that leads to the formation of the molecules. There's a beautiful picture of it. I mean, I have seen so many awesome pictures of it, and I don't use that word lightly. I mean, when I say awesome, I mean truly awesome. That is just so compelling. A separate study by Mireia Exeluz of the Institut de Ciencia de los Materiales de Madrid, Spain, focused on the Helix Nebula, one of the nearest planetary nebulas to our solar system, a distance of 700 light-years. This nebula, which burns at 120,000 degrees Celsius, contains a rich variety of molecules. Looking at Herschel data, Excellencia's team found OH+ in locations where carbon monoxide molecules, previously ejected by the star, are most likely to be annihilated by the strong UV radiation. Once oxygen atoms are free from the carbon monoxide, they're able to make the oxygen-hydrogen molecules, a process that bolsters the hypothesis that UV radiation promotes their creation. These studies are the first to show how planetary nebulas may seed the cosmos with OH+, but the astronomers have yet to show that the conditions within would actually allow water formation to proceed. Read the studies: Herschel Planetary Nebula Survey, First Detection of OH+ in Planetary Nebula by I. Ailman, and Herschel's Spectral Mapping of the Helix Nebula, Photo Dissociation and the OH+ emission, are published in Astronomy and Physics. All right, let's head on over to the Thunderbolts again. And bingo, Helix Nebula. How about that? All right. March 2nd, 2015. Beautiful picture of Helix Nebula. A little different. I think that the reason why there are so many different pictures of it is because it's photographed in different light frequencies. An image of the Helix Nebula in the constellation Aquarius exposes more details of its electrical structure. The infrared image shows radio Birkeland currents, called strands, in the press release, crossing the concentric rings and converging on the central star. Will strands now replace the former stringy things? They don't know it's called Birkeland currents. They're either obtuse or ignorant, or corrupt. All three. Will strands now replace the former stringy things in the consensus lexicon? One can see especially well in high-resolution image that these currents consist of double filaments that spiral around each other and are evenly spaced around rings. Here you got PhDs, they see Birkeland currents, and they call them stringy things. Wouldn't that mean that it's open for someone on their side to say that they discovered it and name it after themselves? But they don't. Why is that? Well, I think it's because they know they're Birkeland currents. From an electric universe point of view, the image is looking down the axis of the hourglass-shaped galactic current that powers the star. If viewed from the side, the nebula would have a structure like that of the Ant Nebula. The hourglass shape is caused by the Bennett pinch, from which the star originated and accumulated its matter. The rings will constitute secondary circuits, subject to their own pinch effects, which explains the concentration of glowing matter in them. The outer ring especially appears to consist of double filaments that twist around each other, exactly what is expected of an electric current in magnetized plasma. The bipolar extension of luminosity in the radial filaments, to upper right and lower left, may indicate a diffusion of ring plasma into the further reaches of the hourglass. The apparent inner ring actually may be located on the far side of the star, symmetric with the outer ring located on the near side. If viewed off-axis, the structure would be similar to that of SN 1987A, a beautiful supernova. Or perhaps the inner ring is located closer to the star in a more constricted part of the hourglass. The main ring is estimated to be about 2 light-years in diameter, and the outer reaches of the nebula can be traced to about 4 light-years. It's quite a ways, further than I thought. This provides an order of magnitude sense of the dimensions of the pinch in current powering the sun. Yeah, really. From which the recently discovered ring of energetic neutral atoms, ENAs, likely originates. The Sun's plasma sheath, which the Voyager space probes are now entering, is located well inside the hourglass pinch. This sheath acts as the virtual cathode in the Sun's discharge circuit and is coupled with the hourglass current in a manner yet to be determined. Torello-like experiments are needed to explore the mechanism and details of such plasma interactions. The concentrating and centralizing of funding and research since the establishment of NASA and its sister agencies have resulted in a flood of discoveries. However, it has also resulted in the establishment of a monopolistic consensus that has driven out research into alternative hypotheses. That is the sadness of it. The money talks. The poster boy for this disturbing consequence is Halton-Hart, who was denied telescope time in 1983 to pursue evidence of intrinsic redshift. And I did a spotlight on him in my last Space Show 3, in case you're interested. It's very interesting, to say the least. I mean, they are engaging in a religion at the people's chagrin. Experiments to refine the concepts of alternative hypothesis are unlikely to be done as long as the would-be investigators are exiles. They dig for spare minutes between the cushions of earning a living from other pursuits, and the few temporal coins they find are spent on conceptual outlines. Nothing is left for desperately needed experiments. And that says it all. The once proud queen of the sciences now offers herself for sale to the highest bidder on her street corner. The field of astronomy is no longer a seminar of science, but a battlefield between mercenaries and exiles. Mel Atchison. That was a great article, Mel. I enjoyed that. I remember when that picture was awesome. Now there's a bunch more that make that one pale. It just gets more and more like a human eye, it seems. And it's kind of ironic. I know from watching Suspicious Observers that stars can make water with hydrogen and oxygen.
Did not match space scientists' theoretical predictions. In 2013, the lead author of a paper in the journal Science told Wired.com of the Voyager 1 data. The models that have been thought to predict what should happen are all incorrect. We essentially have absolutely no reliable roadmap of what to expect at this point. And today, scientists have reported that Voyager 2 has now also recently crossed the boundary into interstellar space. And again, the theoretical predictions based on standard solar physics do not match discovery. Don Gurnett, the corresponding author of a study published in the journal Nature Astronomy, said to phys.org, "In a historical sense, the old idea that the solar wind will just be gradually whittled away as you go further into interstellar space is simply not true. We show with Voyager 2, and previously with Voyager 1, that there's a distinct boundary out there. It's just astonishing how fluids, including plasmas, form boundaries." Of course, the predictions of the electric universe theory about the interstellar environment and behavior of the solar wind differ dramatically from convention. The electric universe has always proposed that a vast Birkeland current enters our solar system and, in fact, powers the sun. We asked retired professor of electrical engineering Dr. Donald Scott to offer his overview of the Voyager 2 findings to date.
Well, a few days ago, researchers at the University of Iowa announced that space probe Voyager 2 left the sun's heliosphere in late 2018 and entered what they think is the interstellar medium. Its sister probe, Voyager 1, did that earlier. I think it was back in 2012. And they announced that this latest transition was signaled definitely by and they emphasized a strong increase in the plasma density measured by the probe. In other words, the probe essentially went through what they refer to as a wall, a boundary there between the heliosphere and the interstellar medium. Well, these guys, astrophysics in general is still in the mindset of fluid dynamics and gravity only, so you continuously hear words like winds and shocks and bow waves. And in fact, one typical astronomer commented on this latest release. He said, quote, "In a historic sense, the old idea that the solar wind will just be gradually whittled away as you go further into the interstellar space is simply not true." No kidding. We show with Voyager 2, and previously with Voyager 1, that there is a distinct boundary out there. It's just astonishing how fluids, including plasmas, form boundaries. Well, yes, in a sense, plasmas are fluid, but fluids are not plasmas. So, and do they form boundaries? Yeah, you betcha. Again, they seem to be surprised when they shouldn't be surprised. We in the electric universe realize that the discovery of an increase in the plasma density is completely consistent with the electric Bessel function model of a Birkeland current. So we're not surprised at all. The electric universe model of star formation, that is how the sun formed, is that it results from a Z-pinch in a Birkeland current filament inside our galaxy. And in our model, in the EU model, matter, that's to say ions, electrons, neutral atoms, molecules, etc., form in concentric cylinders. So it's quite probable that the outer cylindrical layer of the Birkeland current is a region of increased density. And so that's what the EU would have expected, and we don't look at it as a surprise or a discovery. It would be something we would be looking for. It's also true in the classical plasma lab experiment. Alfvén did them, Langmuir did them. There is often a double layer of charge just outside the cathode, just above the cathode. It's called the cathode drop. And in the case of the heliosphere in the electric universe model is the outer layer of the heliopause. It serves as a virtual cathode. And so thinking of it that way, we would expect to see an increased density of matter just at the cathode. And in our model, the heliopause is the cathode. So that again is what we would expect to see.
It's going to increase in strength, and the plasma tufts are going to go into the arc mode. You will see the photosphere. There they are. They don't like each other. It's like a bunch of kabuki warriors pushing each other away. They're all positive, and they're all looking for advantage and not finding it. You might hear Monty's voice in the background if they have the audio on. He's increased the current. The tufts have begun to go into, I know whether it's a high glow mode or that's arc mode. You can see now, it's a better model that you can see the sunspots. Sunspots are where there are no tufts. There's something that he's got the excitation such that it looks like the chromosphere. That little black thing in the bottom, I guess, Michael can tell me whether, is that the spectroscopic probe or it's a probe of some sort. There's the corona. The ring around the outside is the cathode. And of course, in the model, in the Safire model, you need a cathode. But in real space, of course, the cathode is a virtual cathode. But there's the corona. The reason that the corona there looks like it's only on one side is because the anode is closer to the cathode on that spot where you get the corona. If it were equally spaced, you'd see the corona all the way around. Sorry for the hokey ending there.